Maeve's Secret, When the Loving Wife Was the World's Hidden Queen. Subscribe now. Before we start this jaw-dropping tale, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Imagine this: the quiet, loving, everything-for-you wife. What if she was secretly one of the wealthiest people on the planet? For 7 years, Scarlett Hayes lived a simple life, hiding her billionaire identity for the man she loved. She traded boardrooms for charity bake sales, haute couture for bargain racks, all for a husband who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. When he discarded her for a richer woman, he thought he was upgrading. He had no idea he had just thrown away a diamond for a shard of glass. This is the story of how a hidden heiress, betrayed and broken, unleashed her true power and returned to bulldoze his world. Are you ready for a journey of vengeance and rebirth that will challenge everything you believe about love and power? Join me for this incredible transformation. The Gilded Cage. To the outside world, Scarlett Hayes was painfully ordinary. She lived in a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb of Savannah, Georgia, a city known more for its historic charm than its ultra-rich orbit. Her days were a quiet rhythm of tending her small garden, volunteering at the local library, and cooking elaborate meals for her husband, Adrian Clark. She drove a reliable 5-year-old Toyota, clipped coupons, and her biggest indulgence was a weekly latte from the local cafe, The Daily Grind. She was sweet, unassuming, and completely devoted to the man she had married 7 years ago. Adrian was the center of her universe. He was handsome, ambitious, and possessed a charisma that could charm the most hardened cynic. He worked as a mid-level financial analyst at a respectable but unremarkable firm downtown. To his colleagues, he was a man on the rise, sharp and hungry, but held back by his humble circumstances. He often lamented his luck in life, talking about grand ambitions that seemed ludicrously out of reach. If only I had the capital, he'd sigh to work friends over cheap beers. I could be running this city. What no one knew, least of all Adrian, was that the woman he came home to every night, the woman who mended his socks and meticulously managed their tight budget, was not Scarlett Hayes, the orphan she claimed to be. She was Scarlett Sinclair, the sole heiress to the Sinclair global conglomerate, a worldwide empire with stakes in tech, real estate, and energy, valued at over $2.50 billion. Scarlett had met Adrian during her final year at the University of Georgia, where she studied art history under an assumed name, desperate to taste normalcy after a childhood suffocated by tutors, bodyguards, and the cold, calculating world of high finance. Her parents, Edward and Elaine Sinclair, had been brilliant but distant figures, more comfortable in a boardroom than a playroom. They had died in a private jet crash when she was 18, leaving her in the care of her formidable grandmother, Mrs. Augusta Sinclair, and as the sole heir to their vast fortune. Overwhelmed by the weight of her inheritance and the world's prying eyes, Scarlett had devised a plan to escape, if only for a while. Adrian, then a scholarship business student, was everything her world was not. He was passionate, saw her for who she was, and seemed unconcerned by wealth or status. When he proposed a simple life away from the glittering pressures of the elite, Scarlett saw it as a romantic fantasy come true. She believed she had found a man who loved her, not her name. And so, with a sinking heart, but a hopeful spirit, she made a choice. She placed her entire fortune into a blind trust, accessible only by a complex series of protocols known to her and her family's most trusted counsel, Mr. William Ruiz. She told Adrian a fabricated story of a lonely childhood in a forgotten orphanage and adopted her new identity as a woman with nothing but her husband's love. For 7 years, she played the role perfectly. She found true joy in anonymity. Watching Adrian strive, she felt a sense of pride. She believed she was supporting his dreams, that their love was a fortress built on a foundation sturdier than money. But the cracks had begun to show in their fortress. Adrian's ambition, once a quality she admired, had curdled into bitter resentment. He grew tired of their modest life. He began making snide remarks about her simple clothes, their budget vacations, and her lack of connections. "Did you see David Chen's new fiancée's ring?" he'd comment after a work event, his eyes gleaming with a greedy light. "Must be 10 carats. Her father is a shipping magnate from Singapore." He would then look down at Scarlett's simple gold band, a symbol of the life he now disdained, and his lip would curl into a slight sneer. He began working late, attending networking events that left him smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. He grew distant, his touch infrequent and superficial. The easy laughter that once filled their small home was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated by Adrian's heavy sighs of dissatisfaction. Scarlett felt the change deep in her bones. A cold dread began to pool in her stomach. She tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but her gentle inquiries were met with irritation and accusations. "What is there to talk about, Scarlett?" he snapped one night, tossing his briefcase onto the dining table she had so carefully set. "We're stuck. We're going nowhere. I'm suffocating, and you're content to just float along." "I thought we were happy," she whispered, her heart aching. "I thought this was what you wanted." "I wanted a partner," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Not a housekeeper. I need someone who can help me. Someone with resources." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. Resources. It was a word that had defined her entire life, a word she had run from, only to have it thrown back in her face by the man she had sacrificed everything for. She looked at Adrian, the stranger before her, his face twisted by a greedy ambition she had never truly seen before. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt the ghost of Scarlett Sinclair stir within her. The game that began as a romantic escape was about to become a brutal war, and she was the only one who knew the true power of the weapons at her disposal. 2. The D-Day dismissal. The final blow came on a crisp October afternoon, the air carrying the smell of wood smoke and decaying leaves. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. Scarlett had spent the entire day preparing a feast, a recreation of their first date, handmade pasta, a rich bolognese sauce she had slow-cooked for hours, and a splurge bottle of Chianti. She wore a simple blue dress he once said was the color of his favorite sky. She waited, the table set with their best china, the candles flickering, her heart a fragile mix of hope and apprehension. Adrian came home 3 hours late. He didn't even glance at the meticulously prepared dinner. His face was flushed with excitement, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy she didn't recognize. He tossed a thick, cream-colored envelope onto the table, where it landed with a soft thud beside the uneaten breadsticks. "What is this?" Scarlett asked, her voice small. "That," he said, pulling at his tie, a triumphant grin playing on his lips, "is our future, or rather, my future." Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers. The sterile, legal language was a brutal counterpoint to the romantic dinner she had prepared. The words blurred, but the message was clear. Irreconcilable differences. No fault. A clean break. Signed, Adrian. "I don't understand," she stammered, looking up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. "Our anniversary." "Oh, Scarlett, please," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be so naive. Did you really think this was working? This small, pathetic life? I'm meant for more. I've been given an opportunity, a real one, and I can't have you holding me back." The name on the legal documents, the petitioner opposite hers, was a name he had mentioned with increasing frequency, always with a tone of reverence. Genevieve Thorne, heiress to the Thorne banking fortune in New York. A woman whose photograph was a society page staple, always draped in jewels and haute couture. A woman of resources. The pieces of his recent behavior snapped together with sickening clarity. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the scent of Chanel No. 5 clinging to his shirts. He hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He had been actively replacing her. "You're leaving me for her?" Maeve's voice was barely a whisper. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice piercing her chest. "Leaving you?" "Honey, that implies we were on the same level to begin with," he said, his cruelty absolute. He began pacing the small living room, his movements suddenly too grand for the space. "Genevieve understands me. She understands ambition. Her father, Mr. Harrison Thorne, is willing to make me a senior partner in his new private equity venture. This is the big league, Scarlett. This is where I belong." He finally stopped and looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple dress, her tear-streaked face with undisguised pity. "Look, I'll be fair. The house has equity, but there's some capital. You can keep it. You can keep the car. It should be enough for a woman with your simple needs. Think of it as severance pay for 7 years of service. 7 years of service, not love, not partnership. Service." The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. He saw her as an employee he was now firing. The love she had poured into his life, the sacrifices she had made, the identity she had discarded. It was all worthless to him. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had invalidated her entire existence. "I gave you everything," she said, the words choked in her throat by unshed tears. Adrian laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You gave me nothing, Scarlett. You had nothing to give. That's the whole problem." He picked up his briefcase, not the worn leather one she had bought him 5 years ago, but a new, sleek aluminum one she had never seen before. A gift, no doubt, from Genevieve. He paused at the door, turning back to deliver one last crushing blow. "I hope you find a quiet life for yourself," he said, his voice laced with condescending magnanimity. "Maybe you can work at that library you like so much. It suits you. Just sign the papers. It's better for everyone if we do this quickly and cleanly." The door closed behind him, leaving Scarlett alone in the flickering candlelight. The smell of the bolognese sauce she had so lovingly prepared suddenly felt nauseating. The beautiful meal was a monument to her own foolishness. He thought he was leaving a penniless orphan in his wake. He thought he was shedding dead weight to soar to the stratosphere of the elite. He had no idea of the storm he had just unleashed. In that moment, as the last vestiges of her love for him died, something else took its place. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound. But underneath, a different feeling began to simmer. It was cold, hard, and utterly unfamiliar. It was rage. Sinclair-sized rage. She looked at the divorce papers on the dining table, the legal instrument of her humiliation. "Cleanly and quickly," he had said. She picked up her phone, her hands surprisingly steady. She scrolled through her contacts, past the local plumber and the dentist, to a name she hadn't called in 7 years. The screen glowed with 2 words. William Ruiz. Her thumb hovered over the call button. The woman who would make the call would not be the heartbroken wife in the blue dress. It would be the billionaire heiress he never knew existed. The game was over. The war was about to begin. 3. The unleashing of the Titan. The first 24 hours after Adrian left were a blur of hollow-eyed shock. Scarlett didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. A vast, empty cavern where her heart used to be. She moved through the house like a ghost, their home now a museum of his shared lies. She took a black trash bag and, with cold, methodical precision, swept every photo, every gift, every last trace of him into it. It wasn't catharsis. It was an exorcism. By dawn, the house was stripped of their shared past, as empty as she felt inside. She finally allowed herself to look in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes, usually so full of soft warmth, were dark and haunted. She was wearing one of Adrian's old, faded t-shirts as a nightgown. This was the woman he had discarded, the weak, plain, penniless orphan. He had created this version of her, and he had destroyed it. It was time for Scarlett Sinclair to come home. She showered, the hot water a blessed shock to her system. She dressed not in her usual modest attire, but in the one emergency outfit she had kept hidden in the back of her closet, a pair of black tailored trousers, a silk blouse, and a pair of plain but elegant leather flats. They were remnants of her old life, a contingency she had prayed she would never need. Then she made the call. The phone rang only once before a familiar voice, crisp and calm as ever, answered. "William Ruiz speaking." "William," she said, her own voice sounding rusty and strange to her ears. "It's me." There was a pause, an instant of stunned silence on the other end of the line. William Ruiz, the gray-haired, impeccably dressed head of Sinclair Legal, had been her father's closest confidant and had managed her family's affairs with unwavering loyalty for over 30 years. He was more of a father to her than her own had ever been. "Scarlett," he finally breathed, the name a mixture of surprise, relief, and deep, inexpressible concern. "My dear, are you all right?" "No," she said, the single word conveying a world of hurt. "I'm not, but I will be." She took a deep breath, the air in the sterile house feeling charged with a new energy. "William, I'm coming back. I want you to execute Protocol Alpha immediately." Protocol Alpha, the code name they had devised years ago for the dissolution of the blind trust and the full reinstatement of her legal identity and financial power. It was the emergency button, the glass to break in case of catastrophe. "Consider it done," William said, his voice instantly shifting from worried guardian to ruthlessly efficient executive. "A car will be at your location in an hour. We have the penthouse at the Four Seasons in New York City ready for you. Your security detail is being mobilized as we speak. What are your immediate instructions?" "The house," she said, looking at the small suburban box that had been her cage. "Sell it. Donate the contents to charity. I don't want to see anything from this life again." She paused, her gaze dropping to the divorce papers still on the dining table. "And William, I need you to find out everything there is to know about a man named Harrison Thorne and his private equity ventures. I also want a full dossier on his daughter, Genevieve, and my ex-husband, Adrian Clark." "I already have a preliminary file on the Thornes," William said, his tone grim. "Harrison has been trying to make inroads against Sinclair Shipping for years. This is no coincidence, Scarlett. It appears your husband was fished as a valuable asset." The clinical business term was somehow more insulting than any emotional betrayal. She wasn't just left. She was strategically eliminated. "I understand," she said, her voice hardening. "One more thing, William. The divorce papers. Do not let Adrian's attorney file them. You will handle the proceedings." "With pleasure," William said, a hint of steel in his voice. "We will file for adultery and fraud. His petition will be buried. He won't know what hit him." An hour later, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a car so out of place in Savannah, it might as well have been a spacecraft, pulled silently up to her curb. A man in an impeccable suit, her new head of security, opened the door for her. As Scarlett slid into the luxurious leather interior, she took one last look at the house, the quiet street, the life that was now nothing more than a bad dream. She did not look back as the car sped toward the private airfield, where a Sinclair Global jet waited. Scarlett's phone. A new high-end satellite model provided by her security sprang to life. It was an encrypted message from William. Attached was a single document, the summary of Sinclair Global's holdings. Line after line of incomprehensible numbers, company names, and market values stretching into the billions. At the bottom was the net worth of the estate she now fully controlled, $257.4 billion. She stared at the number not with joy or triumph, but with a chilling sense of purpose. Adrian had left her for a woman with resources. He had disparaged her for having nothing. He had built his future on the foundation of her supposed poverty. He wanted to play in the big leagues. She was about to show him he wasn't even in the same sport. The penniless orphan was dead. Scarlett Sinclair, the billionaire industrial titan, had returned from the ashes, and she was coming to collect a 7-year debt of pain and humiliation, with interest. 4. The Ice Queen reappears. The transformation from Scarlett Hayes, the suburban wife, to Scarlett Sinclair, the formidable CEO, was swift and absolute. It began the moment she stepped onto the tarmac in New York and into the rarefied air of her former life. The penthouse at the Four Seasons, overlooking the majestic expanse of Central Park, was her chrysalis. It was a world of silent, efficient staff, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the ambient hum of immense power. William Ruiz was waiting for her, standing next to a large mahogany table covered in files and electronic tablets. He looked older than she remembered, but his eyes retained the same sharp intelligence and unwavering loyalty. He did not hug her or offer platitudes. He simply gave her a small, respectful nod. "Welcome back, Ms. Sinclair," he said. The title, so foreign for so long, settled upon her like a perfectly tailored suit. "It's good to be back, William." The first few days were a blur of intense briefings. She was a fast study, her mind so long occupied by domestic trivia, proving to be as sharp and analytical as her father's. She absorbed 7 years of market fluctuations, technological advancements, and corporate strategy with a ravenous appetite. She wasn't just catching up, she was preparing for war. The physical transformation unfolded in parallel. The plain, unassuming woman from Savannah was systematically erased. A team of New York's best stylists, trainers, and nutritionists descended upon the penthouse. Her long, unstyled hair was cut into a sharp, elegant bob that framed her face and emphasized her cheekbones. Her wardrobe of faded jeans and cotton sweaters was replaced by a carefully curated collection of Tom Ford power suits, sleek Dior gowns, and dangerously high Christian Louboutin stilettos. Her new uniform was an armor. Every piece was chosen to project an aura of untouchable power and icy elegance. She learned to walk with a new posture, a straight-backed confidence that commanded attention. The soft, gentle cadence of her speech was honed into a precise, measured tone that brooked no argument. Within a week, she was ready. Her reemergence would not be a discreet affair. It would be a statement. William had organized an emergency board meeting of Sinclair Global, a collection of powerful aging men who had grown comfortable in her absence, managing the empire under William's firm hand, but without a true Sinclair at the helm. She walked into the Sinclair Global boardroom on the 80th floor of their New York skyscraper, the click of her heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the cavernous room. All conversation ceased. The 12 board members, titans of industry in their own right, stared at her as if they had seen a ghost. They remembered a quiet, grieving teenager. They were unprepared for the woman standing before them now. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice cold and steady as she took her place at the head of the table, her father's seat. I apologize for my long absence. I was otherwise engaged. Rest assured, my sabbatical is over." She didn't wait for their responses. She launched straight into a brilliant and ruthless analysis of the company's performance, pointing out missed opportunities, bloated divisions, and a lack of aggressive innovation. She laid out a bold, new vision for Sinclair Global, one that involved a major push into sustainable energy and a strategic acquisition of a cutting-edge AI firm. She had their full, undivided attention. The sleepy, complacent energy in the room had been replaced by a palpable tension, a mixture of fear and grudging admiration. But her grand strategy had a more personal, more specific target. "Finally," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "I've reviewed the file on Thorn Bank's recent ventures. Their attempts to undermine our shipping logistics are amateurish, but persistent. It's time we sent a message." She brought up a new file on the large screen at the front of the room. It was an innovative, mid-sized logistics firm called Logi Next. Logi Next has developed a predictive shipping algorithm that could revolutionize the industry, she explained. The Thorns have been trying to acquire them for the past 6 months. Their offer is currently stalled at $900 million. She paused, letting the information sink in. "This morning," she continued, a shadow of a smile touching her lips, "Sinclair Global submitted a competing offer for $1.5 billion, all cash. The deal will close by Friday." A ripple of shock and excitement ran through the room. It was an aggressive, almost éclatement. It was a direct, public attack on Harrison Thorne's beau. "Furthermore," Scarlett said, her gaze turning to ice, "I've looked into the Thorne's new private equity firm. It's a vanity project for his daughter and her new associate." She let the word hang in the air. "It appears they are focusing their initial investments on the luxury hospitality sector." She clicked to another slide, this one detailing a portfolio of boutique hotels. "We will begin a systematic acquisition of key properties in every market they target. We will outbid them, absorb their targets, and exhaust their seed capital before they sign their first deal. I want their firm to be a total failure. Is that clear?" The board members, once skeptical, now looked at her with a newfound respect that bordered on fear. This was not Edward Sinclair's daughter. This was a predator. As the session adjourned, William lingered behind. "A bold re-entry, Scarlett," he said, a gleam of pride in his eye. "You've reminded them who's in charge." "I wasn't talking to them, William," she said, looking out the window at the city below, a concrete jungle where only the strong survived. "I was talking to him." She knew the news of the Loginext acquisition would hit the financial world like thunder. Harrison Thorne would be furious, and Adrian, so proud of his new position, his new life, would be right in the blast radius. He wanted to be in the big leagues. She had just changed the rules of his game, and he didn't even know he was playing against her. The awful reckoning. 2 months passed. Adrian Clark was living the life he had always dreamed of. He and Genevieve Thorne were the city's new power couple. They had just moved into a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, a wedding gift from her father. Adrian had a new title, Senior Vice President of Thorne Private Equity, a corner office with a panoramic city view and a wardrobe of custom-tailored suits. He was, finally, in his own mind, a success. Yet, a shadow loomed over his new paradise. Their first major undertaking, a fund to acquire luxury boutique hotels, had been a spectacular failure. Every target they identified, every deal they pursued, was inexplicably snatched away at the last minute by an unseen, heavily resourced competitor. Rumors on Wall Street whispered about a newly aggressive Sinclair Global, but the moves were so precise, so targeted, They felt personal. Harrison Thorne was losing capital and prestige, and the pressure leaked directly to Adrian. "It's a ghost," Harrison had snarled at him in one board meeting. "Someone is playing games with us, and you, with your fancy Ivy League degree, can't seem to find out who." Tonight, however, was supposed to be a reprieve, a celebration of their status. It was the annual Stars Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the absolute pinnacle of New York's social calendar. For Adrian, this was his true arrival. He stood beside Genevieve, her neck draped in Thorne diamonds, basking in the flash of cameras and the fawning greetings of the city's elite. He felt a surge of vindication. This was his place. He thought for a fleeting moment of Scarlett. He imagined her in her small Savannah house, probably watching some cheap TV show, completely oblivious to the glittering world he now inhabited. The thought filled him with smug satisfaction. He had made the right choice. The grand doors to the main dining hall burst open. A silence fell over the crowd, a sudden, collective catching of breath. The sea of famous faces parted for a new figure to pass. She wore a glittering, midnight blue silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. A single, dazzling diamond necklace resting on her collarbone. The legendary Sinclair star rested at her throat, catching the light and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her dark hair was styled into an impeccable, sharp bob, and her eyes, cold and calculating, swept the room, missing nothing. She was flanked by two men, the venerable William Ruiz and Mr. Kenji Tanaka, the brilliant, reclusive CEO of a rival tech empire, a man who rarely made public appearances. Her presence radiated an almost gravitational pull of power and influence. Adrian's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. His blood ran cold. The face was familiar, but the woman was an impossibility. It was Scarlett. But it wasn't. It was as if his quiet, simple wife had been possessed by the spirit of a vengeful goddess. "Who is that?" Genevieve hissed beside him, her voice tight with jealousy and intrigue. "I've never seen her before." A portly, red-faced banker, who had been fawning over them moments before, chuckled nervously. "You've been out of the country too long, Genevieve. That's not just anyone. That's Scarlett Sinclair." The name hit Adrian like a physical blow. Sinclair. Sinclair Global. The ghost in the machine that had been systematically dismantling his professional life. It couldn't be. It was a joke. A nightmare. "Sinclair?" Genevieve repeated, her perfectly sculpted brows rising. "The Scarlett Sinclair? I thought she was a recluse. A ghost." "Well," the banker said, his eyes fixed on the approaching trio. "The ghost is back, and apparently she's friends with Kenji Tanaka. Rumor has it they're working on a merger. Can you imagine? Sinclair Global and Tanaka Industries? They could buy God." Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed world was reeling on its axis. All the pieces snapped into place with horrifying clarity. The failed hotel deals, the Loginext acquisition, the inexplicable, personal nature of the attacks on the Thorns. It had all been her. As if sensing his gaze, Scarlett's eyes met his across the crowded room. There was not a flicker of recognition, not a hint of their shared past. Her gaze was one of complete indifference, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture or a particularly uninteresting insect. That look was more devastating than any shout or accusation could have been. It told him he was nothing to her. She, Kenji, and William moved through the room, a powerful whirlwind. The people Adrian had been desperate to impress were now bending over backward to get a moment of her time. Harrison Thorne, Genevieve's formidable father, approached Scarlett with a tense, obsequious smile. "Ms. Sinclair," Harrison said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. A pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Harrison Thorne. Scarlett extended a cool, gloved hand. Mr. Thorne, I've been following your recent difficulties in the market. Most unfortunate. Her voice was pure silk, but the words were pure venom. Harrison's face tightened. Indeed, it seems we have quite the aggressive new player to deal with. Aggression is merely another word for efficiency, Scarlett countered softly, before turning her full attention to Kenji Tanaka, dismissing the Thorne patriarch as if he were a junior associate. Genevieve watched, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. She turned to Adrian, her voice a poisonous whisper. You know her, don't you? How do you know Scarlett Sinclair? Adrian couldn't speak. His throat was dry. His mind was a chaotic symphony of denial and terror. Genevieve's eyes narrowed, a shrewd, calculating light entering them. She looked from Adrian's ashen face to the magnificent figure of Scarlett Sinclair, and then back again. A slow, mounting horror spread across her features. Oh my God, she breathed, the realization hitting her. She's your ex-wife, the poor, pathetic orphan you told me about. It was her. Adrian could only nod, a single jerking motion. The smug satisfaction he had felt minutes before had curdled into abject terror. He hadn't just divorced a simple woman from the suburbs. He had betrayed, humiliated, and discarded the most powerful woman in the room. He thought he was climbing a ladder. Instead, he had just jumped off a cliff, and he was only just starting to realize how far he had to fall. Sick. The final lesson. In the weeks following the gala, Adrian's life crumbled with brutal speed. The Sinclair name was a death sentence to his career at the Thorns. Harrison, humiliated and furious, treated him with open contempt. Genevieve, seeing him now not as a prize, but as the world's biggest fool, was cold and distant. Their relationship devolved into a series of bitter whispered arguments in their cavernous, silent penthouse. Social invitations dried up. Fawning colleagues now avoided his gaze. He was a pariah, a walking cautionary tale. Scarlett, meanwhile, operated from a sphere so far above him that he could only watch the fallout. She was a fixture in the financial news, an industry supernova. The Sinclair-Tanaka merger was being hailed as the deal of the century, creating a global giant that dwarfed all competitors. Every move she made was precise, strategic, and devastatingly effective. But amidst the corporate warfare and financial machinations, Scarlett found herself feeling empty. Vengeance, though satisfying, was a hollow victory. She had dismantled Adrian's world, but it hadn't filled the void in hers. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, seeking refuge from her own thoughts, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went incognito to a small, independent art gallery in New York's East Village. Dressed in simple jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a pulled-down baseball cap, she was no one. She was just a woman looking at art. The gallery was quiet, the air smelling of linseed oil and turpentine. The art was raw, powerful, and full of a desperate, beautiful energy. She was particularly drawn to a series of large, abstract canvases, chaotic swirls of black, white, and a defiant, electric blue. They spoke to the storm within her own soul. They have something special, don't they? The voice, low and resonant, startled her. She turned to see a man standing next to her. He was tall, with kind, intelligent eyes and paint-stained hands. He wore a paint-splattered t-shirt and worn jeans. He looked at the paintings, not at her, with a look of deep understanding on his face. "They're honest," Scarlett replied, the words surprising herself. "That's him," the man said, nodding toward a figure in the corner, the artist, who was talking animatedly with a prospective buyer. "Leo O'Connell. He paints like he's trying to claw his way out of a locked room, all passion and fury." The man finally turned his gaze to her, a warm, genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'm the owner, David. David Martin." Scarlett, caught off guard, introduced herself simply as Elena. Over the next hour, David walked her through the gallery, talking about the art. Not with the pretentious jargon of the elite art world, but with a simple, heartfelt passion. He saw the story in every brushstroke, the emotion behind every color choice. He didn't ask her what she did, where she lived, or who she knew. He simply talked to her about art. She felt a part of herself she thought was dead begin to stir. It was the art history student from college, the young woman who had been captivated by beauty and creation, not by balance sheets and market caps. She found herself returning to the gallery several times over the next few weeks. She and David developed an easy rapport. Their conversations moved from art to books, to music, to the simple absurdities of life in New York. With him, she wasn't a Sinclair. She was just Elena, a woman with a keen eye and a quiet sadness he didn't pry into. He was a welcome anchor in the turbulent sea of her new life. Meanwhile, an unexpected new player entered the game. Kenji Tanaka, her new business partner, was not the cold, reclusive genius the media portrayed. In their private meetings, she discovered a man with a dry wit, a fierce intellect, and an almost unnerving ability to see through her carefully constructed armor. During one late-night strategy session in the Sinclair Global boardroom, as they finalized the details of the merger, he suddenly stopped, looking at her over the rim of his teacup. "You've enjoyed this, haven't you?" he asked, his dark eyes intense. "Dismantling the thorns, humiliating your ex-husband." Scarlett stiffened. It was a necessary business strategy. Kenji allowed a small, knowing smile. "Of course, but revenge is a fire that consumes the person wielding it, Ms. Sinclair. It will keep you warm for a while, but eventually, you're left with only ashes." He set down his cup. "Harrison Thorne is an old fool. Your husband is an insignificant parasite. They are not worthy of the energy you are spending on them. This pan, our company, that is worthy of your energy. The future we can build is worthy of it." His words struck a chord deep within her. He wasn't judging her. He was challenging her. He saw her, not as a weapon of revenge, but as a brilliant leader. And he was calling her to be better. He was the first person in her new life to talk about the future, not the past. "What do you propose?" she asked. Her voice low. "I propose we stop playing defense," he said, his eyes glowing with a new intensity. "Let's build something revolutionary. Focus our resources on the new sustainable energy division. Let's create something that changes the world, not just settles old scores. That is a victory worthy of a Sinclair and a Tanaka." It was a turning point. Kenji's challenge, combined with the simple human connection she was finding with David at the art gallery, began to shift her perspective. The rage that had fueled her was beginning to cool, replaced by a new, more compelling ambition. She had proven she could destroy. Now she was starting to wonder if she could build again. The war against Adrian and the Thorns was won, but the battle for her own soul, for the woman she wanted to become, was just beginning. And for the first time, she felt she didn't have to fight it alone. She had found allies, not in bankers and lawyers, but in the quiet gallery of an artist and across a boardroom table from a man who saw her future, not just her past. 7. The unconditional victory. Adrian Clarke's freefall was swift and brutal. Fired from the Thorns, he became toxic on the financial scene. His lavish lifestyle evaporated after a nasty annulment from Genevieve, which even forced him to legally change his last name to cut ties with her family. Shattered, stripped of his identity, he moved into a dreary apartment upstate, where his ambition festered into a dangerous obsession. In his twisted logic, Scarlett owed him for waking her up, and he convinced himself he could still get her back. He began a campaign of pathetic harassment, dozens of pleading and then threatening emails and voicemails, all intercepted by William's team. When his messages went unanswered, his desperation pushed him to stalk her. One afternoon, he evaded security, confronting her in the private elevator lobby as she was leaving with Kenji Tanaka. "Scarlett!" he shouted, his appearance disheveled, his eyes wild. She looked at the hollow shell of the man she had married. "Adrian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You need to stop this." "Stop this?" He laughed hysterically. "I'm just getting started. You think you can ruin me and walk away? I know the real you, the scared woman playing dress-up. This isn't you." Kenji stepped slightly in front of her. "I think you should leave." Adrian's gaze filled with hate. "And who are you? Her new pet?" Scarlett cut him off, her voice like ice. "He is my partner, Adrian. Something you never were." She turned and left without a second glance. The public rejection pushed him over the edge. If he couldn't have her, he would destroy her. He sold a twisted, fabricated story to a notorious tabloid journalist, Mr. Marco Fernandez, painting himself as the victim of a manipulative, mentally unstable heiress. "She hid her billions to trap an unsuspecting husband," the headline screamed, the story filled with intimate, distorted details designed to give it credibility. Simultaneously, Harrison Thorne, seeking revenge, fed damaging stories to the financial press, questioning Scarlett's stability and fitness to run a global empire. The combined assault was a perfect storm. Sinclair Global's stock took a minor hit, and whispers about Scarlett's sanity began circulating in the markets. She was in a meeting with William and Kenji when the news broke. William was apoplectic, planning a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Scarlett, however, was eerily calm as she read the article. Inside, the cold rage from the night Adrian left her solidified. He had weaponized their intimacy, twisting the life she built from love into something pathological. "Don't sue them, William," she said quietly. "Scarlett, we must," he insisted. "We can't let this stand." "No," she said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous new light. "A lawsuit is a battle. He has declared a war. And in a war, you don't file paperwork. You demand unconditional surrender." She turned to Kenji, a chilling smile on her face. "He thinks he can control the narrative by exposing our past. He's forgotten one detail. I know all of his secrets too, and unlike him, I have the proof." The time for reacting was over. Adrian and the Thorns had pushed her too far, mistaking her restraint for weakness. Now she would show them what real power looked like. She would end this not by winning, but by annihilating them completely. Scarlett's counterattack was not a single explosive event, but a masterfully orchestrated symphony of destruction. It began quietly. She unleashed the full, terrifying power of the Sinclair Global Legal and Intelligence Divisions, the teams William Ruiz had kept sharp. Her first target was Marco Fernandez and his tabloid. Within days, Sinclair Global's investigators had unearthed a career's worth of corruption. William didn't file a lawsuit. He personally delivered the complete, damning file to the district attorney's office. Fernandez was arrested, and the story he had written about Scarlett was publicly discredited. Next, she turned her attention to Harrison Thorne. While he had been busy sowing stories of her instability, Scarlett's team had been conducting a deep forensic audit of the entire Thorne bank operation. They found a pattern of insider trading and fraud. The evidence was irrefutable. William Ruiz set up a private meeting with the Thorne board, excluding Harrison. He laid out the evidence, explaining that Sinclair Global now held a controlling stake in the Thorne debt. The message was clear. Either Harrison Thorne was ousted, or Sinclair Global would release the evidence and call their debt, an act that would vaporize the Thorne legacy. Within 24 hours, the board announced Harrison was stepping down due to health reasons. His attack on Scarlett had cost him his empire. The final piece of her strategy was reserved for Adrian. It would be the most public, most devastating blow of all. She agreed to her first televised interview with Ms. Sarah Jenkins, a legendary journalist known for her tough questioning. The interview aired live, in prime time. Scarlett walked out looking serene and powerful in a simple white dress. For the first half, she spoke eloquently about her vision for Sinclair Global. Then, Jenkins shifted gears. Ms. Sinclair, I have to ask you about the recent very public attacks on your character. Your ex-husband, Adrian Clark, has made some very serious accusations. Scarlett looked directly into the camera, her expression one of sad resolve. He did, she said calmly. Adrian and I were married for 7 years. At his request, I lived a life separate from my family's resources. I did this because I was in love. The story he told was a painful, twisted version of our life. But what he failed to mention was the reason our marriage ended. From a folder, she pulled out an affidavit detailing Adrian's affair with Genevieve Thorne, which began over a year before their divorce. Then she showed emails between Adrian and Harrison Thorne, outlining the plan to trade up his penniless wife for a senior role at the firm. He didn't just leave me, Scarlett stated. He sold me. The control room was in stunned silence, but she wasn't finished. Mr. Clark has accused me of ruining him. The truth is, he was never the man he pretended to be. She slid his old credit card statements across the table. These detail thousands of dollars spent on luxury items, while he told me we couldn't afford to fix a leak in our roof. And this, she held up one last sheet, is his college application, where he lied about being an orphan long before he met me. Adrian Clark's entire life has been a calculated fraud. She looked back at the camera, her eyes clear. I didn't destroy that man. I simply held up a mirror. My only fault was loving someone incapable of loving anyone but himself. I've paid the price for that mistake, and now, so has he. She ended the interview by announcing the launch of the Sinclair Foundation, a $2 billion trust to support victims of emotional and financial abuse. In his apartment, Adrian watched his world collapse. She had exposed him completely. The reckoning was final. In the aftermath, the world saw Scarlett as a paragon of strength. Sinclair Global stock soared. Adrian, a social leper, disappeared, rumored to be working a low-level job in some obscure province, a ghost of his own ambitions. Scarlett's life, for the first time, was truly her own. The rage had subsided, leaving peace. The empire was no longer a burden, but a tool to innovate and build. Under her and Kenji Tanaka's leadership, the newly merged Sinclair Tanaka Global became a world leader in sustainable technology. Her work was her passion, a legacy that would dwarf the petty dramas of her past. Her partnership with Kenji was one of deep mutual respect and shared vision, but it was outside the boardroom where she found the quiet joy that had so long eluded her. She continued her visits to David Martin's art gallery, always as Elena. He remained a grounding force, drawn to her quiet intelligence and resilient spirit, knowing nothing of her immense power. One crisp fall afternoon, a year after her return, they were walking through Central Park. "You look lighter," David observed. Scarlett smiled. "I feel lighter. There's something I need to tell you. My name isn't Elena." She told him everything. The Sinclair name, the hidden life, the betrayal, the return. David listened patiently. When she finished, a long silence stretched between them. "So," he finally said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "does this mean I have to start calling you Ms. Sinclair?" Scarlett laughed, a sound of pure relief. I prefer Scarlett. Well, Scarlett, he said, his eyes shining. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Now, are you going to finish that coffee or are you going to use your billions to buy the entire cart? In that moment, standing in the heart of the city she now commanded, she felt a profound sense of completeness. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not just victorious, but whole. She was surrounded by people who saw her for who she truly was. Kenji, who respected her mind. David, who cherished her spirit. She had lost a fantasy built on a lie, but she had gained something infinitely more valuable, a reality of her own making. The hidden heiress was gone forever, replaced by a woman who stood proudly in the light, the master of her own vast, brilliant and limitless horizon. Call to action. Closing. Engage and subscribe. She was betrayed, shattered, and left with nothing. Or so he thought. Scarlett Sinclair's incredible journey, from hidden wife to billionaire powerhouse, is a testament to the unbreakable strength of a woman scorned. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the entire game. Her story proves that your past doesn't define you, and the deepest betrayals can forge the most powerful versions of ourselves. She took her pain and turned it into a global empire, and her heartbreak into a beacon of hope for others. If this story of resilience and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please give us a like. Share this tale with someone who needs a dose of inspiration. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable, real-life dramas.
He built an empire with his hands, but destroyed a family with a single message. 10 years ago, Julian Sterling walked away from the only woman who ever saw the man beneath the title. She was pregnant, with triplets. He never looked back. Now, face to face with the family he abandoned, he's brought to tears by a sight he thought he'd never deserve to see again. If someone you loved disappeared without a word, only to return with tears and a trembling apology, would you forgive them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because love like this deserves to be heard. Now let's begin. Manhattan shimmered beneath the amber fingers of dawn, skyscrapers glinting like blades of glass above a city that never paused to grieve. At the top of one of those towers, Julian Sterling sat in silence. The luxury around him was obscene. Italian leather furniture, framed international awards, sleek tech humming in the corners, but none of it comforted the man behind the empire. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, were tired. He had everything, and no one to share it with. 10 years earlier, everything had been different. Back then, love wasn't an inconvenience. It was everything. Her name was Lila Hart. She had met him in New Orleans, under the tender hush of autumn light. Julian had just closed a regional acquisition deal, and Lila, barefoot in the garden behind her mother's Creole cottage, was humming as she read aloud to a group of children. Her voice carried like memory itself, soft, eternal, and vivid. That moment cracked something open in Julian, something long buried under polished shoes and inherited expectations. He was supposed to marry a senator's daughter and multiply the Sterling fortune, but Lila wasn't polished for high society. She was honest, curious, and soulful. She asked about his favorite books, not his boardroom rankings. She laughed at his jokes instead of weighing their political correctness. And when she looked at him, she didn't see a CEO. She saw Julian. Their romance bloomed in secret. Dinners on her porch instead of gala tables, walks through Spanish moss instead of red carpets, and eventually, a small wedding beneath. Lantern-lit oaks in a quiet chapel few would ever know existed. They were rebels. Not the kind who protest with signs, but the kind who believe love is worth risking everything for. But love wasn't enough for Vivian Sterling. Vivian was the reason Julian had never known softness as a child. She raised him like a project, not a boy. She taught him early, image over honesty, control over chaos, silence over truth. When she learned of Lila, her disapproval was immediate and brutal. She's not one of us, Vivian had sneered, sipping espresso in her marble kitchen. She'll never survive our world. You have responsibilities, Julian. You're not a child in love. You're a Sterling. At first, Julian resisted. He wanted both, the woman who made him human, and the world that made him powerful. But as months passed, the pressure mounted. The board raised concerns. Old money allies withdrew support. Every hallway he walked became a corridor of expectation, echoing with unspoken ultimatums. Then Lila told him she was pregnant, with triplets. 3 children. 3 little lives growing inside the woman he adored. It should have been the happiest moment of his life. Instead, it became his greatest test. Vivian was clear. "If you do this," she said, "you will lose everything. Your stake, your name. I'll see to it." Julian hesitated. Then, one rainy evening, from behind the towering glass walls of his corporate office, he did the unthinkable. He texted her, "I must choose duty. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a decision made with trembling hands and a hollow chest." Lila received the message while folding tiny clothes she'd bought from a second-hand shop. Her world shattered in that moment, not with sound, but with silence. Not even a knock at the door, just the realization that the man she loved had vanished into obligation, leaving her and 3 unborn children in the shadows of his legacy. The next morning, she left New Orleans, her belly full of life, her heart full of heartbreak. Julian buried himself in his work. Every conference he spoke at, every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every profit report, none of it touched the ache beneath his skin. He told himself she'd be fine, that she didn't need him, that time would dull the edges. But time, as he would learn, doesn't dull, it deepens. It etches regret like water-carving stone. He tried to move on, but no other woman felt like Lila. No conversation was as effortless. No smile stirred that same flame. On his 10-year anniversary at Sterling Life Care, he stood on stage beneath thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, partners cheered, and all he could think about was a faded photo in his drawer, Lila in a white sundress, her hand resting on her stomach, her smile a whisper of forever. Bellefontaine wasn't the kind of place where time stood still, but it did know how to hold space for broken hearts. Lila Hart arrived in the small southern town in the early hours of a humid spring morning, her eyes puffy from silent tears, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her stomach. With no more than a duffel bag, a few baby supplies, and one treasured wedding photo, she stepped into the unknown with quiet courage. The town welcomed her the way it had always welcomed those searching for a second chance, gently, without questions. Locals didn't ask about her past. They noticed the way she rubbed her belly absent-mindedly, how she walked with purpose even when her steps were uncertain. They saw the strength in her, even when she hadn't yet seen it herself. Lila found a small, weather-worn cottage on the edge of a magnolia grove. It needed work, but it had charm, peeling shutters, a sagging porch, and wild jasmine climbing the walls. It became her haven. Within those creaking walls, she birthed her triplets, Ava, Eli, and Noah. Ava, firstborn, arrived with wide, searching eyes and the quiet intensity of someone born old. Eli came next, gentle, slow to cry, his tiny hand curling instinctively around his mother's finger. Then Noah, always impatient, even in the womb, emerged with a wail that echoed with raw life. In those moments, something remarkable happened. Lila wasn't alone anymore. She was a mother, and that made her powerful. The early years were grueling. Diaper changes by candlelight during power outages, nights spent pacing back and forth with crying babies on each shoulder, days juggling formula measurements, community tours, and side gigs at the local heritage center just to keep the lights on. But Lila endured, not with bitterness, but with quiet, determined grace. By the time the triplets were toddlers, Lila had earned the affection of the entire town. She told stories during weekend festivals, stories that brought old houses to life and made the past feel like a living friend. Her knowledge of Bellefontaine's ancestry helped secure a preservation grant for the historic district. Her passion rippled outward, and people noticed. Still, the ache remained. On the quietest nights, when the children were asleep and her tea had gone cold, Lila would hold that photo, the one from their secret wedding beneath the stars, and whisper the same silent question she had repeated for years. Why did you leave? She never spoke Julian's name to the children. Not because she hated him, but because they deserved to form their own stories, not inherit her heartbreak. When they asked, she'd simply say, "Your father is somewhere out there. Maybe one day you'll meet him." The children grew fast. Ava became the quiet leader of the trio. She was fiercely protective of her brothers, especially Noah, whose energy was boundless and unpredictable. Eli, with his soft-spoken wisdom, often played peacekeeper, his calming presence grounding them all. Their bond was undeniable, 3 pieces of a single heartbeat. Despite the absence of a father, their lives weren't joyless. They had water balloon fights in the backyard, built makeshift castles from cardboard, celebrated birthdays with handmade crowns and homemade cupcakes. Lila made sure of that. She filled every holiday with magic, every moment with intention. Her love was relentless, even in exhaustion. But something changed when they turned 8. Ava began asking deeper questions. She noticed how Lila would pause when a father walked into school pickup, how her voice caught when reading bedtime stories that ended with happily ever after. One evening, while watching a family film, Ava turned to her mother and asked, "Did Daddy love you?" The question gutted Lila more than she could admit. She swallowed the lump in her throat and answered with careful truth. "He did, once. But sometimes love isn't enough for some people, not because you're not worth it, but because they don't know how to keep it." She didn't cry that night. But later, when the children were asleep, she stepped outside onto the porch and allowed the tears to come freely. Meanwhile, far away in a Manhattan skyscraper, Julian Sterling sat in his penthouse library, flipping through old journals he had hidden from himself. His life looked perfect on paper: global expansion of Sterling Life Care, an honorary doctorate from Columbia, invitations to elite panels and forums, but none of. It made his hands stop trembling when he thought of Lila's last words, "Don't make me beg for the love you owe me." Her voice haunted him. He tried to drown it out with distractions, newer ventures, international press, high-stakes mergers. But her voice always returned, especially in the silence. On his 40th birthday, Julian found himself alone. He watched the candles flicker on an untouched cake and realized he had no one to share the moment with. He hadn't celebrated his children's birthdays, hadn't seen a first step or heard a first word. All he had were balance sheets and regrets. That night, he retrieved a shoebox from the back of his closet. Inside were photos he had secretly saved, one of Lila laughing beside a fountain in New Orleans, another, blurry, of the sonogram she had emailed him before he cut contact. He traced the outlines with trembling fingers and whispered, "I'm sorry." But apology meant nothing without action. And so, when Sterling Life Care identified Bellefontaine as the ideal site for its next innovation hub, Julian didn't delegate the visit to a junior executive. He volunteered, not because of strategy, but because of longing. He needed to see the town where his family lived, even if only from a distance, even if he wasn't ready to be seen. To the world, Julian Sterling was the portrait of invincibility. In every business magazine, every televised interview, he was poised, articulate, brilliant. The face of modern maternal care, a man who'd turned tragedy into triumph, according to the press. But in truth, there was a room inside him that no one entered, a room where sorrow lived like a permanent guest. And inside that room, Lila's voice echoed endlessly. His days were regimented: wake at 5, run 5 miles, scan the market, respond to executive summaries, sign contracts, deliver vision statements, and smile, always smile. But at night, when the windows reflected only his own face and silence reclaimed the penthouse, he lost that mask. He began drinking tea again, her favorite. Not because he liked the taste, but because it reminded him of sitting on her porch, watching twilight settle over New Orleans, her head on his shoulder. That memory had no price tag. It couldn't be bought or replicated. And that was what made it priceless. He often wondered if she still drank tea, or if she'd taught their children to love the same cinnamon vanilla blend she used to brew in a chipped ceramic pot. The same one he had once called ugly but magical. He still had that pot. It sat high on a shelf, untouched but never discarded, like the life he had walked away from. Marcus, his younger brother, had visited one evening with a bottle of scotch and a worried look. He never judged Julian, but he didn't coddle him either. "You've built an empire," Marcus said, "but you left your heart behind." Julian didn't answer. He just looked away. "You can still go back," Marcus added quietly. "Maybe not to who you were, but to who you were supposed to become." That night, Julian didn't sleep. He wandered through his home, stopping before a hidden drawer in his private study. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside were handwritten notes, faded postcards, and a small pair of pink knitted baby shoes, one of the first things Lila had ever bought after. Discovering she was pregnant, he held them gently, as if they might vanish if he gripped too hard. Across the city, Sterling Life Care's headquarters buzzed with preparations for expansion. The Bellefontaine project was already underway, contracts signed, blueprints approved. Julian's mother, Vivian, remained the ever-present storm behind his public calm. She masked her control in polished strategy, but her manipulations ran deep. She had made it clear over the years, Lila and the children were an unwise detour. She never mentioned them directly, but in boardroom speak, they became liabilities, distractions, unaudited risks. "Don't let emotion blur the mission," she told him once, brushing imaginary lint off her blazer. But Julian was no longer blind. He began to notice things. The carefully scrubbed history in internal reports, the way HR compliance officers sidestepped questions about executive family affairs, the thinly veiled attempts to erase every trace of a past he hadn't given permission to forget. He said nothing. He simply watched, and quietly, he planned. His trips to Bellefontaine were supposed to be brief, a symbolic gesture, a CEO touchpoint. But when his driver turned off the freeway and the countryside opened before him like an old book, he felt a tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The streets were slower. People waved. Time moved differently, and it scared him. He was no longer Julian the strategist in this town. He was just a man trying to remember how to breathe without achievement. His first day there, he avoided the town center entirely. He walked the edges, observed from park benches and side streets. It was easier that way, easier than admitting what he was really looking for. On the third day, he passed a mural near the community library. It showed children playing beneath trees, their laughter captured in brushstrokes. At the corner of the mural, a woman's figure stood out, painted with grace, holding a book. It was Lila. He stepped closer. Her likeness was unmistakable. A plaque beneath read, "To the voice that preserves our past and protects our future. Thank you, Miss Hart." Julian's throat tightened. He wasn't just a memory in her world. He was invisible. She had created beauty without him, raised children without him, become a legend in a town he hadn't set foot in since he chose legacy over love. And yet, he couldn't turn away. That evening, he returned to his hotel and made a decision. No more anonymous watching. No more pretending he was only there for business. He needed to see her. Not to reclaim anything. Not to beg for what he lost, but to understand who he had left behind. On a soft spring morning, Bellefontaine stirred beneath a veil of pink petals. Cherry blossoms danced along the breeze, brushing against weathered storefronts and sunlit sidewalks like memories returning after a long absence. Julian stood outside Mason's Corner Cafe, hand resting on the doorknob, heart caught somewhere between dread and longing. He had passed this cafe 3 times already, walked past slowly, his eyes scanning through the windows, always telling himself, not today. But this time, something shifted. He couldn't leave without knowing if she still smiled the same way, or if she would even look at him at all. The door chimed softly as he entered. Inside, the smell of fresh biscuits, vanilla coffee, and warm cinnamon settled into his senses like a song from another life. The cafe was quiet, save for the low hum of morning chatter. He scanned the room, and there she was, Lila Hart, sitting near a sun-drenched window, notebook open, tea steaming beside her hand. 10 years had passed, but her presence still stilled the air. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair gathered in a loose knot. A strand had slipped, brushing her cheek. She looked peaceful, but not untouched. There was weight in her eyes now, a maturity shaped by storms survived and victories won alone. 3 children sat with her. Ava, poised and silent, her eyes scanning a book. Eli, tracing patterns on a napkin, thoughtful even in play. And Noah, grinning, energy coiled in his frame like a spring, mid-joke about something only he found funny. Their features echoed her, grace, poise, softness, but in each child, Julian saw reflections of himself. He froze. Lila looked up. Their eyes locked. She didn't gasp, didn't rise. Her expression didn't crumble into recognition or bloom into sentiment. It held, steady, guarded. Her lips parted slightly. She whispered his name, not with longing, not with venom, just acknowledgement. Julian. He stepped forward, every part of him aching. Lila, I didn't expect. She raised a brow, voice calm but firm. You didn't expect to see your children? The cafe, oblivious to the reunion it hosted, carried on. Conversations continued. Coffee steamed. But at their table, time folded in on itself. Julian's gaze shifted to the triplets. he began, but no words followed. His voice broke beneath the weight of the moment. Noah looked up. "Mom, who's this?" Lila's hand touched her son's shoulder gently. "This is someone we used to know. Someone important." Ava studied him, cautious but curious. "He looks like Eli." Eli blinked, then tilted his head. "Why are you crying?" Only then did Julian realize the tears running down his cheeks. He knelt beside them, careful not to crowd, voice trembling. "I'm your father, and I know I don't deserve this moment, but I had to see you." Silence followed. The children didn't move, but they didn't turn away either. Lila exhaled. "We should talk. Not here." Outside, the air had shifted. The sky threatened rain, as if nature itself sensed the storm that had just passed through. They walked through Bellefontaine's old park. Lila led them to a bench beneath an oak tree, the same one she had read under during the children's toddler years. The tree had witnessed scraped knees, whispered lullabies, and now, this. "I don't want apologies," she began. "I want honesty. What are you doing here, Julian?" He didn't flinch. "I came for the project. That was the reason. But the truth, I've thought of you every day since I left. Every award, every handshake, every deal. None of it replaced what I lost. And you expect what?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just tired. "Redemption? A second act?" "No," he said quietly. "Just a beginning." She looked at him. Really looked. Past the suit jacket, past the carefully composed face of the man she once loved. She searched for something real. And perhaps she found it, because her voice softened. "They ask about you. They don't say it outright, but I see it in their eyes when other kids talk about dads. I tell them you're far away. I don't lie. But I don't tell the whole truth either." Julian nodded slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness. But if there's anything I can do now, anything, I want to earn my place in their lives. And maybe if it's not too late, yours too." The children played nearby, watching from a distance as if sensing the gravity in their mother's posture. Lila stood. "Then start with them. Because if they trust you, maybe one day, I'll learn to trust you again too." Julian looked up at her, eyes full of quiet awe. "You're even stronger than I remembered." She offered a small, reserved smile. "I had to be." The days following their reunion passed in slow motion. Julian remained in Bellefontaine, not as a guest of honor or a corporate figurehead, but as a man trying to reclaim something fragile. Each morning, he walked through the town quietly, never calling attention to himself, never arriving with an entourage. He visited the library where Lila had curated history, browsed the community garden she helped build, and lingered near the schoolyard where the children played, always watching from a respectful distance. Then, one afternoon, Lila called. "Would you like to pick them up from school today?" Julian stood speechless, the words echoing louder than any boardroom applause. I'd be honored." It wasn't much, just a short walk from the school gates to the house, but for Julian, it felt like miles. When he saw them emerge, Ava holding Eli's hand, Noah darting ahead with endless energy, his breath caught. Noah noticed first. "You came..." Julian smiled. "I did." They walked together, the triplets surrounding him cautiously, like animals unsure of whether to flee or follow. He didn't press. He answered their questions carefully. Ava asked about his job. Eli asked if he liked dogs. Noah, of course, asked if he could drive a sports car someday. Julian laughed. "Not today, but someday, we'll see." That evening, they played a board game in the living room while Lila watched from the kitchen. She didn't interrupt. She didn't guide. She observed, quietly, intently. When the children went to bed, she joined Julian on the porch. "I need to know something," she said, voice steady. "Why didn't you fight for us? Not just me, for them." Julian's reply came slow, careful. "Because I didn't know how to fight without losing everything, and I was too much of a coward to realize that losing everything for the right reasons would have been worth it." She didn't respond at first, just nodded. "I made my peace with raising them alone," she finally said. "But they deserve to know who they are, every part of it, and that includes you. I won't rob them of that." Julian lowered his gaze. "And what about us?" Lila folded her arms. "One step at a time. They come first." That became their rhythm. Julian returned the next day, and the next. He helped Noah with homework, brought Ava books on astronomy, sat with Eli on quiet walks where they barely spoke but somehow said everything. He took them to the town fair, bought them lemon ice, and lost embarrassingly at the ring toss. When a stranger asked if they were his kids, he said yes and meant it. The bond grew slowly, but it grew. One day, Ava fell while biking, scraped her knee badly. Julian rushed to her side, panicked. She looked up through tears and said, "You came," and something broke in him, the wall, the guilt, the silence. He held her, not as a man making amends, but as a father who'd missed 10 years and was now terrified of missing a moment more. Word spread in Bellefontaine. Some were skeptical, others cautiously hopeful, but most simply observed. They saw a man who no longer drove a luxury car, who shopped at the local grocery, who attended PTA meetings without drawing attention. Lila remained cautious. She didn't allow the children to spend the night at Julian's rental house. She didn't invite him to the Sunday dinners with friends. But she no longer closed the door when he lingered. After saying goodbye, and sometimes when the children were upstairs, they sat on the couch together in silence, sharing tea and the quiet comfort of two people who'd lost everything and might be finding something new. Julian had started journaling again. Each entry wasn't about profits or plans. It was about Ava's quiet strength, Eli's gentle heart, Noah's curiosity, and Lila, her laughter, her sharp wit, the way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking. Then came the call from Marcus. "She knows," Marcus said. Julian froze. "Who?" "Vivian. She found out you've been in Bellefontaine. She's furious." He expected that. But what he didn't expect was the next part. "She's contacting the board, planning to frame this as a reputational risk." Julian's past was coming back. For real this time. Not just in memories, but in headlines. He drove to Lila's house that night. "I need to tell you something," he said, eyes heavy. "There's going to be press. They're going to dig. They may even try to question you. My mother won't stay silent." Lila didn't blink. "So let them. You're not worried. I've spent 10 years building a life from ashes. There's nothing they can take that I haven't already lost and rebuilt." Julian stared at her with something close to awe. "How did I ever walk away from you?" She looked down. "Because you didn't believe in me, or in yourself. Maybe now you do." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for time, to earn whatever space you're willing to give me." Lila met his gaze. "Then take it. But remember, if you ever walk away again, there's no third act. You show up or you disappear forever." Julian nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." And this time, he meant it. Redemption, Julian soon discovered, was not a grand act. It was 1,000 small choices made every single day. There were no instant apologies, no sweeping declarations that made the past vanish. What lay before him now was the long, uneven path of showing up, fully, honestly, and without expectation. The first few weeks were marked by uncertainty. He'd arrive early at the community center to help Lila with weekend exhibitions. He offered to restock shelves, sweep floors, and take direction without question. Some locals welcomed him back with cautious warmth. Others barely acknowledged him. But Julian didn't flinch. He wasn't there for applause. He was there because this was the only life that had ever meant anything. At home, Lila set boundaries. He could visit the kids on school nights but not stay past dinner. No surprises, no late-night visits, and certainly no gifts meant to buy affection. Julian honored every line she drew. One evening, after helping Eli rehearse for a school play, Julian lingered on the porch. Rain was beginning to fall in soft drops. Lila joined him, a cup of tea in her hands. "You never used to be this quiet," she said. "I never used to listen," Julian replied. She glanced at him. "You're different." "I had to be. The man he was built to succeed in rooms that didn't allow love. I let those rooms define me. And now, I'm trying to build something new, not just in the company, in myself." For a moment, they listened to the rain. The next week, Julian flew to New York for the Sterling Life Care Board meeting. His public image was at a crossroads. Whispers of his personal entanglements had made their way into the press. Investors were uneasy. A publicist advised him to issue a carefully worded statement and distance himself from Bellefontaine. Instead, Julian walked into the boardroom and did the unthinkable. He told the truth. "I abandoned my family for this company," he said, voice steady. "And now I'm working to earn their trust again. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me honest. And if that's a liability, so be it." Gasps followed. Some board members looked stunned. Others, impressed. Vivian Sterling, regal, unmoved, spoke last. "This is not how a Sterling conducts business." Julian met her gaze without blinking. "Then maybe we've been conducting business the wrong way." The fallout was immediate. Headlines spread, stock prices wavered, but something else happened too. Support poured in from unexpected places: young professionals, working parents, advocacy groups. People saw a man willing to lose everything for the right reasons, and they responded. Back in Bellefontaine, Lila watched the clip on her phone. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply whispered, "He's doing it." Julian returned home late that Friday. He looked tired, but lighter. The triplets greeted him with a group hug that nearly knocked him off his feet. Later that evening, as they roasted marshmallows in the backyard, Ava said, "Dad, some kids at school said you used to be rich." Julian chuckled. "Used to be? Well, like super rich. I had a lot of money," he admitted. "But I didn't have what mattered." "What matters?" Eli asked. Julian looked at them, then at Lila, who sat just beyond the fire's glow. "People you'd do anything to protect," he said. "That's real wealth." Lila met his eyes across the flames. No words passed between them, but something did. Understanding. He had changed. Not just for them, but because of them. The Sterling Life Care annual charity gala had always been a fortress of tradition. Held in Manhattan's historic Linden Pavilion, the event welcomed old money, new influence, and a tidal wave of media. It was designed to dazzle: champagne towers, velvet gowns, gold leaf place cards, all choreographed to uphold an image of polished perfection. But this year, something had shifted. Julian stood backstage, not in his usual tailored tuxedo, but in a simple black suit with no tie. His eyes scanned the crowd from the curtain's edge. There they were, executives, socialites, politicians, all waiting for a polished speech, a strategic announcement, something to restore the headlines to safe, profitable narratives. But that wasn't what he had come to give. Lila hadn't attended. He hadn't asked her to. She had smiled gently and said, "If you're doing this for us, you don't need us to watch. If you're doing it for them, make sure you're honest." And he intended to be. When his name was announced, polite applause filled the room. He stepped onto the stage slowly, gripping the sides of the podium not for dramatic effect, but because he was nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first investor pitch. Except this time, he wasn't selling a product. He was offering his truth. "Good evening," he began, voice firm but vulnerable. "I won't take much of your time, but I will ask for your attention, not as the CEO of Sterling Life Care, but as a man who made a terrible choice and is trying to make things right." The room fell silent. "I left someone behind 10 years ago, someone who loved me when I had nothing, someone who built a life for the children I was too afraid to meet. I thought success meant never looking back. I was wrong." A pause. "Tonight, I want to show you who truly built this company, not with spreadsheets and signatures, but with love, sacrifice, and perseverance." He motioned to the projection screen. It lit up with images, none from boardrooms or product launches. Instead, it showed a small community center in Bellefontaine, a mural of children under oak trees, Lila hosting a local history walk, Ava holding a science fair ribbon, Eli painting beside a classroom window, Noah performing cartwheels in the background, mid-laugh. The crowd stared, hushed. "These are my children," Julian said, "and that's the woman I once failed. But I'm not here to bury that truth. I'm here to honor it." A few gasps, a few murmurs. Even Vivian Sterling, seated front row in her signature pearls, didn't blink, but her jaw tightened. "I built this company for mothers," Julian continued, "but I ran from the mother of my own children. I advocated for families while abandoning my own. Tonight, I reclaim both." The room didn't erupt in applause. Not yet. It waited. "I understand the risk. I understand what this means for investors. But if leadership means anything, it's the courage to stand in the storm and say, 'This is who I am. I will no longer separate my integrity from my title.'" He stepped back. Silence lingered. Then, unexpectedly, a standing ovation rose. Not universal, but real, genuine. Some stood with tears. Some hesitated. But the ripple had begun. Later that evening, away from the cameras, Julian stood alone on the garden balcony of the venue. The city lights blinked below, cold and brilliant. But his thoughts were far from Manhattan. He pulled out his phone. A message waited. "Lila, the kids are proud." "So am I." Julian closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, not as Julian Sterling, CEO, but as the man who had finally faced himself. Meanwhile, in Bellefontaine, Lila sat on the couch, the triplets asleep upstairs, her phone resting on her chest. Her heart beat slower now, more steadily. The man she once loved had disappeared, but the man returning. He was someone new, someone becoming. Legacy, Julian had learned, wasn't etched in stone buildings or sealed in trust funds. It lived in the quiet decisions made when no one was watching. In the months following the gala, the ripple effect of Julian's public confession reached places no press release ever could. For the first time, Sterling Lifecare's identity was not crafted by a branding agency. It was shaped by its founder's willingness to own his failure. And from that truth, something remarkable began. Julian returned to Bellefontaine, not as a visitor this time, but as a man intent on planting new roots. He purchased a modest home near the community garden, just a few blocks from Lila's. He didn't ask to move in. He didn't suggest family dinners. He simply made himself available, present, grounded, and real. The triplets responded in ways only children can. Slowly, sincerely. Ava began calling him Dad during everyday moments, when asking for help with homework or correcting him on a constellation's name. Eli started sitting beside him without being prompted, sometimes just to read. Noah, bold and boundless, told his friends at school, "My dad's back. And he's actually kind of cool." But the deepest healing came quietly. Julian joined Lila at a local school fundraiser. They stood behind a bake sale table, shoulder to shoulder, selling cookies and laughing about burnt batches. It was mundane, uneventful, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Lila turned to him on the porch. This is what I wanted. Not a grand mansion, not a perfect story, just someone who shows up. I'll keep showing up, he said. As long as you'll let me. I will, she replied. But not just for me, for them. He nodded. Always for them. Julian's work life transformed as well. He restructured Sterling Lifecare from the inside out. He appointed new leadership in marginalized regions, launched initiatives focused on maternal support in underserved communities, and funded grassroots programs that aligned with Lila's values. It wasn't to just corporate reform, it was personal penance translated into public service. The board resisted at first, but the public response overwhelmed them. People didn't just see a business, they saw accountability in action. Julian didn't gloat. He simply continued. Vivian remained distant. She attended board meetings. She offered critiques. But one evening she arrived unannounced at Julian's Bellefontaine home. Lila opened the door. They stared at each other for a long moment, not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as two women connected by one complicated man and three innocent children. I'd like to meet them, Vivian said, voice quiet. Lila studied her face. They're playing outside. Vivian walked to the backyard, watching Ava teach Noah how to build a paper airplane while Eli doodled quietly under the tree. She didn't speak. She simply sat on the bench beside them and watched. That night, she left without ceremony. But Julian received a note the next day, I see now. You chose correctly. Time continued its quiet march. Holidays were spent together, imperfect, beautiful, chaotic. Julian learned how to braid Ava's hair. He became Eli's chess opponent. He built elaborate Lego cities with Noah that ended in inevitable collapses and roaring laughter. And Lila? She flourished. With Julian's support, she launched the Bellefontaine Heritage Collective, an independent foundation preserving the town's stories and voices. She hosted educational programs, published community memoirs, and led cultural preservation workshops that garnered national attention. Julian didn't stand beside her as a benefactor. He stood as a supporter, a partner. He carried boxes, served refreshments, took notes. This wasn't about visibility. It was about building a life side by side. One crisp autumn evening, the triplets performed at the local harvest recital. Ava sang. Eli played piano. Noah danced with unfiltered joy. Julian and Lila sat in the front row, fingers loosely intertwined, not as a performance, but as something that had quietly become real. Afterward, as the family walked home beneath a canopy of amber leaves, Julian paused outside his gate. I never thought this would be possible, he said. Lila looked at him. Neither did I, but I'll never stop being grateful. She smiled. Then don't. Just keep choosing this, every day. He nodded, kissed her hand, and walked toward his door. Behind him, he could hear the triplets debating over dessert. the sound of home echoing like music he'd once forgotten how to hear. Love, true love, rarely blooms without trials, and sometimes the deepest test comes not from betrayal or regret, but from fear of loss. It was a frigid winter evening when the call came. Julian had just returned from a community meeting, his coat still dusted with snowflakes, when Lila's voice cracked through the phone. "It's Eli." He collapsed. At school, the world fell silent. No headlines, no board meetings, no mission statements, just the sound of Julian's keys dropping to the floor as he ran out into the night. At the hospital, the hallways pulsed with urgency. Nurses moved swiftly, monitors beeped, and in the sterile light of a pediatric ICU, Eli lay motionless, his small body tethered to machines that hummed and blinked with purpose and fear. The diagnosis, an undetected heart condition, congenital, silent all these years, until now. Julian stood frozen at the foot of the bed, hands clenched, chest heaving. "How did I miss this?" he whispered. "How did I not know?" Lila, holding their son's hand, didn't look up. "We didn't know, we couldn't have," but Julian's guilt was deafening. He had missed first steps, first words. And now, he feared he might miss the chance to say goodbye. In the hours that followed, he didn't leave Eli's side. He read aloud from his old journals. He played soft music on his phone. He whispered apologies, broken, raw, and unfiltered. "I wasn't there," he murmured. "But I'm here now. I'll always be here now. I swear it." Lila watched from the doorway, her heart cracking in places she thought had long healed. She saw a man shattered, but not fleeing. This wasn't the Julian who had once disappeared under pressure. This was a father who would now carry pain on his shoulders if it meant shielding his child from even a sliver of it. Specialists were flown in. Julian activated every connection, every favor, every ounce of influence he had. He didn't care about cost. He didn't care about perception. His only concern was the boy lying in that bed with wires stitched across his chest like unanswered questions. During a long midnight stretch, Lila finally broke. She sank into the chair beside Julian and whispered, "I can't do this alone." He reached for her hand. "You're not alone. Not anymore." The surgery was delicate, high risk, but necessary. Hours passed. When the surgeon finally emerged, mask lowered, expression measured, Julian braced himself for the verdict. "He's stable." He pulled through. The relief that followed didn't come in shouts. It came in tears, in soft gasps, in Lila collapsing into Julian's arms as her body trembled with silent gratitude. Inside the recovery room, Eli stirred slowly. His eyes fluttered open, landing first on his mother, then on Julian. "You stayed," the boy whispered. Julian smiled through tears. Always, that moment became something sacred, not a second chance, but a beginning built on sacrifice, not sentiment. In the days that followed, Julian and Lila took turns sleeping in the hospital room. They read to Eli, played card games, painted pictures on the window panes with washable markers. They talked about dreams and fears and everything in between. For the first time, they weren't partners recovering from the past. They were Keo guardians of a future neither of them was willing to lose again. The story of Eli's battle spread throughout the company and the town. But Julian made sure no press release was issued, no board-approved narrative. This wasn't about publicity. It was about presence. Still, word got out. And something unexpected happened. Parents from around the country reached out, sharing stories of misdiagnoses, of systems that had failed them, of children who hadn't made it. Julian listened. And then he acted. Sterling Life Care announced the launch of a national pediatric care initiative, mobile screening units, emergency intervention teams, research funding focused not on profit, but on prevention. He named it the Heart Project, in tribute not to himself, but to the boy who survived and the woman who never stopped fighting. Months later, Eli returned home, weakened but stronger in spirit. And one evening, as they all sat on the porch watching fireflies flicker through the dusk, Julian leaned close to Lila and said, "I once thought love was measured in words, in promises, but it's not. It's measured in the hours you spend choosing someone, over and over again." Lila, resting her head on his shoulder, whispered back, "And in the moments you stay when it's hardest." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to, because some chapters aren't written in dialogue. They're lived. The town of Bellefontaine had always marked its seasons not with calendars, but with feeling. When winter faded and the scent of magnolia returned to the air, the townspeople prepared for the annual spring festival, a celebration of survival, of stories of new beginnings. This year, the festival felt different. Not because of the weather or the decorations or the food stalls lining the square, but because of the family walking through it together. Julian, Lila, Ava, Eli, and Noah. Together. They moved through the crowd not as a spectacle but as a unit, familiar, bonded, and whole. Ava led the way, her notebook in hand, cataloging facts for her school's cultural preservation project. Eli walked beside her, still recovering, but full of quiet resolve. Noah bounced ahead, chasing bubbles with wild laughter, and Julian and Lila strolled side by side, fingers occasionally brushing, no longer afraid of being seen. The townspeople watched. Some nodded. Some smiled. But all felt something in the air. Renewal, not just of spring, but of hope. Under the newly restored gazebo at the center of town, Julian was asked to speak. Not as a CEO, not as a guest, but as a resident. He stepped forward, adjusting the mic, and looked out over the crowd, not as a man above them, but among them. "Thank you," he began, voice soft but clear. "Thank you for giving my family the space to grow, and me the time to understand what truly matters." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Lila. "I've spent years trying to define success. I thought it was built with numbers and applause, but I was wrong. Success is built with quiet mornings. It's built with forgiveness, with showing up for the people who still believe in you, even when they have every reason not to." Applause followed, not the kind given out of courtesy, but the kind that said, "We see you, we understand." That evening, the festival glowed under lanterns and laughter. Children danced, elders told stories by firelight, and the Sterling family, rebuilt not by chance but by choice, sat together, watching it all unfold. Julian's company had evolved too. The Heart Project grew into a nationwide movement. It introduced programs that trained local health advocates, mobile clinics that served rural families, and scholarships for children of single parents. Sterling Life Care was no longer just a name. It was a legacy reimagined. Vivian, now quieter, occasionally visited Bellefontaine. She no longer gave orders. She brought books for the children. She stayed for dinner. And when she sat beside Lila during Ava's award ceremony at school, the gesture required no explanation. Even Marcus found his way back. He moved into a neighboring town, offered consulting support, and joined Julian in rethinking corporate responsibility. Together they started a nonprofit wing aimed at empowering young entrepreneurs from overlooked communities. But none of it rivaled what Julian found at home. He learned how to cook Lila's favorite gumbo, badly at first. He learned to sew a button back on Eli's shirt. He even learned to meditate with Ava in the mornings, while Noah climbed him like a jungle gym. And one warm evening, as they watched the sunset from the back porch, Julian turned to Lila. "I don't want to wait another 10 years to ask this," he said. She raised an eyebrow, curious. He pulled out a simple ring, nothing flashy, just a silver band engraved with the initials of their children. "Will you let me start again, with you?" Lila's smile held 1,000 memories. "Only if we start from today, not from the past." He nodded. "Today's all I've ever needed." They kissed, soft, assured, real. The triplets caught them and groaned in unison. "Ew." Julian laughed. "Get used to it." "Your mom just said yes." Noah screamed. "Does this mean we get another cake?" And just like that, their new chapter began. The years that followed were not without challenges, school changes, business adjustments, parenting missteps. But they were navigated together. Every step, every misstep, every lesson was shared. The Sterling home was never grand, but it was full of stories, of healing, of loud dinner conversations and quiet bedtime hugs. The photo frames on the walls weren't arranged for show. They were snapshots of life reclaimed. Julian still traveled sometimes. Lila still lectured, but no one missed a birthday. No one missed a recital. And every evening, no matter how late, Julian returned home, to laughter, to questions, to small arms wrapping around his neck. To love, not the romanticized idea of love, but the kind earned through trials and carried through time. The kind that changes a man, a family, and even a town. Because love, when chosen again and again, doesn't just mend what's broken. It builds something new. As the last light fades on this unforgettable journey, we're left with a question that lingers in the heart. Can time truly heal what once seemed lost? Julian and Lila's story wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, raw. But in the end, it was also real. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. A choice we make when it's hardest. A promise we honor, even after everything has fallen apart. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been faced with the choice to forgive someone who broke your heart? Would you take them back if they truly changed? Or would you walk away to protect your peace? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. If this story moved you, if you felt something in Lila's resilience or Julian's redemption, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to the soul. Because here on Love in Twilights, we don't just tell stories. We remind each other that love, when chosen bravely, still wins. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and always stay tender.
How would you respond upon encountering someone you once cherished, now exposed and solitary, seeking your assistance? The city thrummed with the pulse of rush hour, its streets alive with streaks of red and white as vehicles inched through the evening congestion. Ethan Harper lounged in his polished black luxury car, rhythmically drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. The phone vibrated incessantly on the dashboard, a cascade of messages accumulating from clients, his assistant, and a multitude of notifications urging him about tasks he had no time to tackle. With a weary sigh, he glanced at his watch. Another gathering, another agreement, another sprint against the clock. That was his existence now, perpetually in motion, never pausing for a moment. He massaged his temples, attempting to drown out the chaotic symphony of honking horns and irate motorists surrounding him. Just as he extended his hand toward his phone, an unexpected sight drew his attention. Across the street, a woman wrestled with her grocery bags. One tumbled from her grasp, scattering fruit and cans across the pavement. She lowered herself to gather them, her motions deliberate, carrying a sense of effort. Then she faltered a bit, grasping her abdomen. Ethan stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. His heart raced with sudden intensity. The woman's face, marked by fatigue and wear, was undeniably recognizable. Lila. The atmosphere enveloped him, the cacophony of the city dwindling to a soft murmur. Months had passed since their last encounter. She appeared transformed, her previously radiant spirit subdued, her form gently rounded by the journey of motherhood. Yet there she was, Lila Morgan, the woman to whom he had once vowed the universe, now isolated amidst a throng of people, battling to gather her spilled groceries. Ethan Harper had crafted a life that many would admire. A self-made millionaire with an empire spanning various industries, he garnered admiration for his unwavering determination, relentless grit, and tireless drive. He was the one who consistently triumphed, the one who never ceased to advance. Yet, beneath the meticulously crafted facade of achievement, a quietude enveloped him like an ever-present shadow. His skills were undeniable, there was no arguing that. He possessed an uncanny ability to discern precisely what others desired, knowing just the right words to sway the situation in his direction. Encounters with him were nothing short of extraordinary, there were murmurs about his uncanny intuition for commerce. Yet, no one witnessed what followed, the silent journeys back to a desolate estate, the frigid meals consumed in solitude at a table far too expansive for a single soul. As night fell and the city quieted, with his phone finally silenced, he would occasionally roam through his sprawling home, the sound of his footsteps a poignant reminder of its vastness and emptiness. The rooms brimmed with the finest possessions money could procure, artwork, furniture, and gadgets of the highest quality. Yet, there was an emptiness that permeated everything. He had constructed his empire, indeed, yet somewhere in that journey, he had misplaced something elusive, something he couldn't fully identify. Perhaps he simply couldn't bring himself to acknowledge what it truly was. At times, when he permitted himself to linger in the quiet for an extended period, his thoughts would wander back to an era when life felt warmer, when the home was filled with sounds, when solitude was not his companion. Her face appeared vividly in his mind, as if captured in a photograph, Lila. She had been present from the outset, during the time when Ethan's aspirations were merely visions. They resided in a small apartment that carried a subtle scent of paint mingled with the aroma of Thai food wafting up from the restaurant below. The furniture clashed in a disjointed manner, the heater struggled to provide warmth during the winter chill, and there were moments when the fridge stood so barren, it was painful to behold. Yet, they had one another, and in those moments, that was all that truly mattered. Ethan, she'd say, her tone soft yet firm, each time he returned home disheartened after yet another unsuccessful pitch or rejection. You're going to succeed, I believe in you, just stay the course. Her belief in him remained steadfast, even when his own faltered. She was the one who kept him company during those endless nights when sleep eluded him, going over business plans and calculating figures, searching for a solution to make everything come together. She was the one who found humor in his awful jokes, who rejoiced in even the tiniest triumphs as if they had struck gold. One night lingered in his memory, an indelible mark that time could never erase. He returned home late, the weight of a particularly challenging meeting still heavy on his shoulders. His shoulders were slumped, and his face bore the marks of fatigue. "It's over, Lila," he said, collapsing onto the couch, his face hidden in his hands. Once more, they declined. "I'm uncertain about how much longer I can continue with this." She positioned herself next to him, gently removing his hands from his face and cradling them in her own. "It's not over, Ethan," she declared, her voice resolute. "You've faced tougher challenges before, and tomorrow is a new opportunity to rise again, to give it another shot, and to reach your goals, because that's what you do." He gazed at her then, truly gazed at her, and for a fleeting moment, the burden on his chest had seemed a touch lighter. She had been his steadfast support, his unwavering foundation, the singular certainty in a reality that often felt slightly off-kilter. However, circumstances had shifted. As Ethan's career started to take off, so did the demands on his time. Initially, it was merely a handful of late nights, with Ethan returning home well after Lila had already drifted off to sleep. He would softly murmur an apology, press a gentle kiss to her forehead, and vow to find a way to make amends. And she had faith in him. She always had faith in him, for that is the essence of love. You extend them the courtesy of trust. However, the late nights started to occur more often. The murmured regrets morphed into frantic justifications, and the assurances, those earnest, optimistic assurances, always appeared to remain just out of reach. Ethan was perpetually occupied, relentlessly pursuing the next deal, the next significant opportunity. And Lila, despite her unwavering patience and deep understanding, started to sense that she was gradually fading from clarity. Though she kept it to herself, the feeling of loneliness began to seep into her life. In those still moments, particularly during the evenings when she arranged the table for two, a wave of loneliness would wash over her as she sat down to eat alone, waiting for Ethan's call to say he would be late. The mornings when she would awaken to the chill of the other side of the bed, Ethan already departed for some early meeting or flight. And then came the weekends, once cherished and personal, now gradually consumed by networking events and a barrage of phone calls. Lila made an effort to adapt. She reassured herself it was only a phase, that this was merely the cost of creating a shared future. Yet, there were evenings when she found herself wide awake, gazing at the ceiling, pondering when the fleeting moments would come to a close. And then there were those other nights, the ones when she would sense the constriction in her chest, the heaviness bearing down on her, making it difficult to draw in a breath. She was unaware of how to label it in those days, yet it was perpetually present, hovering just below the surface. She hoped to avoid any feelings of resentment towards Ethan. She understood the effort he was putting in, the depth of his desire to achieve, not solely for his own sake, but for the two of them together. She aimed to offer her unwavering support, just as she always had. She donned a courageous facade, pushing aside her own concerns to nurture his aspirations. Yet, there were instances, momentary and ephemeral, when she would glimpse her reflection in the mirror and ponder the person she was evolving into. The woman gazing back at her appeared fatigued, weary, as if she were a stranger to herself. It was as if Ethan's reality existed in a different realm altogether, distant and unconnected from hers. As his career soared, his social circle expanded, filled with colleagues, clients, and business partners who navigated high-powered cocktail parties and exclusive dinners with ease. Lila stood beside him, offering a polite smile and engaging in light conversation, yet a sense of not belonging lingered within her. These belonged to Ethan, not to her. She sensed it in their manner of speaking, their inquiries courteous yet shallow, as if she were merely an ornament instead of an equal. One evening, following yet another occasion where she found herself engaging more with the waitstaff than the actual guests, she decided to confront him. "Ethan," she said as they arrived home, "do you ever get the sense that we're inhabiting entirely different worlds?" He gazed at her, taken aback by the inquiry. "What do you mean?" he inquired, loosening his tie while making his way to the kitchen. She trailed behind him, pausing briefly before finding her voice once more. "When I'm at these events, your work events, it feels as though I'm merely a visitor in your world." Ethan scowled as he opened the fridge, reaching for a bottle of water. "That isn't accurate," his tone is quite dismissive. "You're not just a visitor, Lila, you're my collaborator." "Could it be that I am?" she inquired gently, and the question lingered in the space that separated them. He glanced her way, uncertainty clear in his gaze. "Naturally, you are. Your presence has made all the difference in my journey." She longed to trust him, yet his words resonated with emptiness, as if they were lines memorized rather than genuine emotions. Though she longed to voice her frustrations, to express the loneliness that had enveloped her, she found herself too drained to engage. With a quiet nod, she released her thoughts and made her way to bed, allowing him to remain absorbed in his emails and spreadsheets. However, circumstances did not improve. If anything, they deteriorated further. Lila ceased attending the events, no longer stayed up for him at night. She sought to occupy the emptiness with pastimes, with companions, with anything that might divert her from the widening chasm between them. Yet, nothing seemed to succeed. The solitude lingered, embedding itself more profoundly, etching a hollow within her that demanded attention. It was on a serene Saturday morning that the tipping point was reached. Ethan sat in his office, meticulously reviewing contracts, while Lila lounged on the couch, her gaze fixed on the suitcase brimming with belongings by the door. She had been gazing at it for what seemed like an eternity, her heart racing as she practiced the phrases she was determined to articulate. As she finally rose and made her way to his office, her legs trembled, threatening to buckle under her weight. She tapped gently on the doorframe, and Ethan looked up, his gaze unfocused. "Hey," he said, motioning for her to enter. "Is it possible to postpone this? I'm currently engaged in a task." "No," she said, her voice quivering. "It is not possible." He furrowed his brow, placing his pen aside and finally focusing on her, as if rediscovering her presence after an eternity. "What's happening?" She inhaled deeply. Her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "I can't continue like this, Ethan." His eyes grew large, the word striking him with the force of a blow. "What exactly do you mean by that? What is it that can't be done?" "This," she remarked, her hands sweeping aimlessly across the space, encompassing him and everything around them. "This way of living is no longer sustainable for me. I sense myself fading away, existing in this space, hoping for your acknowledgement, and I can no longer endure it." "Lila," he began, but she interrupted him with a shake of her head. "I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have always done so, yet I can no longer continue to give myself up for something that no longer feels like it belongs to us. You're crafting this remarkable existence, Ethan, yet I find myself absent from it." He rose to his feet, extending his hand toward her, yet she retreated. "Hold on," he urged, his tone filled with urgency. "This can be resolved. I will improve. I will." "It's too late," she murmured, tears cascading down her cheeks. "I've been making an effort, Ethan. I've been putting in so much effort for what feels like an eternity, and I find myself at a breaking point." She pivoted and exited, leaving him without a chance to utter another word. With her suitcase in hand, the doors closing reverberated through the house, and in that moment, Ethan became acutely aware of the profound silence that enveloped him. Silent and desolate, in a manner he had not completely grasped until that instant, and she was no longer there. He was unaware that he had been holding his breath until the sudden honk of a car behind him snapped him back to reality. Ethan blinked, his fingers clenching the steering wheel with determination. For a brief instant, he paused. Is it time for him to leave? Should he really say anything at all? Yet, in that moment, he caught sight of Lila falter. Initially, there was merely a subtle tremor, her hand instinctively extending to find balance in the emptiness surrounding her. In a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, she collapsed to the earth. She fell to her knees on the pavement, the groceries she had just collected scattering once more, tumbling into the disorder of the street. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped out onto the pavement. He felt a swirl of uncertainty about his words, yet deep down, he understood that leaving without saying anything was not an option. This isn't the moment. The atmosphere was dense, each noise surrounding him muted as he cautiously advanced, taking one hesitant step after another. Is that you, Lila? He called out, his voice a mere breath, as if uttering her name with any more volume could fracture the delicate worlds surrounding him. She tilted her head just a bit, her eyes rising to connect with his. For a brief instant, her eyes, worn and undeniably her own, met his gaze, and the distance of time between them appeared to vanish. Yet, her expression transformed, moving from confusion to recognition, and ultimately settling into an emotion he found elusive. Could it have been fear? Regret? He was too pressed for time to unravel it. Her body swayed once more, her strength clearly waning, and before he could process it, his legs were already in motion. Is that you, Lila? His voice cracked this time, rising in volume, filled with urgency. He caught her just as she began to tip forward, his arms encircling her quaking form. She felt more delicate than he recalled, her form relaxed against him, her breaths barely whispering. His heart raced as he gently placed her on the ground, his fingers tenderly sweeping her hair away from her face. Lila, are you able to hear me? Ethan has arrived, and I'm here. Her lips parted slightly, a soft sound slipping free, yet it remained unintelligible. Her eyes flickered gently, and for a fleeting instant, he believed she might utter a word, but then they shut, her form sinking deeper into his embrace. Hey, no, 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 he murmured, his voice trembling as he softly shook her shoulder. Don't leave me, Lila, I beg you. She shifted gently, her head resting against his chest. Ethan, she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. I'm doing well. You're not fine, he snapped, his voice tinged with a desperation that overshadowed his anger. Lila, you just fell on the sidewalk. What's happening? What is going on with you? Her hand flickered faintly, reaching for her belly, and that's when he observed it once more. Her other hand cradled the curve of her stomach protectively, instinctively, his breath caught, his chest tightening. As the truth dawned on him, she was expecting a child. Lila found herself expecting a child. Is it the baby? He inquired with urgency, leaning in closer. Is there an issue? Kindly, Lila, engage with me. No, she whispered, her voice a mere breath, simply weary. Exhausted, he repeated, in disbelief. Lila, you fell down. That's not exhaustion, that's, he caught himself, breathing out sharply. This was not the moment for a dispute, especially when she appeared on the verge of losing consciousness at any moment. He needed to take action. All right, he stated with conviction, as if trying to reassure both himself and her. We are heading to the hospital immediately. No, she protested softly, her fingers clutching his sleeve with the faint strength she could muster. I don't need, Lila began, but he interrupted her, his voice a blend of softness and firmness. Feel free to share your thoughts later, but for now, your input isn't needed. We are embarking on our journey. Her lips parted, ready to contest, yet silence enveloped her words. Instead, her hand glided from his sleeve, descending softly to her side. Ethan chose not to linger for any further objections. He lifted her gently, his arms enveloping her as he rose to his feet. She seemed diminutive, delicate, and it caused a painful twist within him. Just a moment, he said, his tone gentler now. Simply wait a moment. He darted swiftly, navigating the stream of pedestrians who hardly acknowledged his presence. The cacophony of honking cars receded into the distance as his attention sharpened on the singular priority, ensuring her safety. Upon arriving at his car, he skillfully opened the passenger door with a single hand, carefully guiding her into the seat. He positioned her with great care, ensuring her comfort before shutting the door and making his way to the driver's seat. As he settled into the seat and ignited the engine, he cast a fleeting look in her direction. With her eyes gently shut, her hand lingered softly on her belly. She appeared so exposed, so different from the Lila he once recognized. The woman who had once stood beside him with quiet strength and unyielding resolve now appeared as though she was struggling to keep herself intact. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale as he navigated into the flow of traffic. The journey to the hospital seemed to drag on forever, with every red light lingering like a moment frozen in time. His thoughts surged with inquiries, an unyielding tempest of anxiety and remorse. What had transpired with her? How did she find herself in this situation? And why was he unaware? What was stopping her from sharing it with him? He looked at her once more, feeling a tightness in his chest as he observed the gentle rhythm of her breathing, each rise and fall a comforting yet poignant reminder of her delicate nature. Just hang on, he whispered softly, uncertain whether his words were meant for her or for his own ears. As they arrived at the hospital, Ethan parked carelessly close to the entrance, indifferent to the glances directed his way as he leaped out of the car. He gently opened her door and leaned in, his hand softly grazing her cheek. Lila, we've arrived, he said softly. Are you able to hear me? With unwavering resolve, he scooped her up from the car, holding her tenderly as he made his way through the hospital entrance. The refreshing chill enveloped him, yet he hardly registered its presence. The nurses glanced over, their faces transforming into masks of worry as they absorbed the image of the lifeless, pale woman cradled in his embrace. She fell to the ground, Ethan exclaimed, his tone laced with desperation. She is expecting, please assist her. The nurses swiftly moved into action, directing him toward a wheelchair. Place her here, one of them directed. We'll handle her from this point onward. Ethan paused briefly, a hint of reluctance in his demeanor, but eventually nodded and carefully placed Lila into the chair. She stirred gently, her head tilting to the side as the nurses started to wheel her away. Ought I to? He began to speak, but was cut off by one of the nurses. Please feel free to wait in the lobby, we will provide you with updates as soon as possible. Ethan moved restlessly around the cramped waiting room, the sound of his shoes softly tapping against the linoleum floor. His thoughts surged chaotically, a whirlwind of incomplete ideas and lingering uncertainties. Occasionally, he would steal a glance at the double doors where Lila had vanished, yearning for someone to emerge and reassure him that she was all right. The minutes dragged on, each one weighing down the atmosphere more than the previous. At last, a doctor appeared, his demeanor composed and unwavering, yet Ethan's heart raced in his chest. He stepped forward, his voice wavering as he began to speak. How is she doing? Is the little one? She's stable, the doctor remarked, his voice calm and comforting. The infant is stable as well, yet she is profoundly malnourished and fatigued. We are administering fluids and keeping a close watch on her condition. She requires adequate rest and nutrition as she progresses, but for the moment, she is fine. Ethan exhaled, a sense of relief washing over him unexpectedly, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. Thanks a lot. May I have the opportunity to see her? The physician acknowledged with a nod. She's taking a moment to rest, but feel free to keep her company. Please maintain a low volume. She requires rest above all else. Ethan trailed behind the doctor along the corridor, his heart racing with each stride. Upon arriving at the room, he paused at the threshold, his hand lingering on the frame. Lila reclined on the bed, her complexion a soft shade of pale yet serene, her hands gently resting over her abdomen. She appeared diminutive, almost delicate, and it struck him with a sharp wave of remorse. He entered softly, drawing a chair nearer to the bed before settling into it. For a moment, he simply observed the rise and fall of her breath. He yearned to express himself, to extend his hand and connect with her, yet the words remained trapped in his throat. As he lingered in that space, the soft whispers of conversation floated in from the corridor. He found himself caught in a web of conversation, the words weaving through the air, impossible to overlook. A nurse spoke gently, noting that she lacks insurance to cover all of this. Her bills are several months past due. I'm unsure of how she's been coping. Another voice chimed in, mentioning that she's been residing in her car. What a sad situation, especially with her being pregnant. It's astonishing that she's even here. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Residing in her vehicle. Late payments. He shifted his focus back to Lila, a weight settling in his chest. How did it come to this? How had she found herself in this place, isolated, battling through, and just managing to survive? His jaw tightened as he rose suddenly, the chair gliding gently across the floor. He approached the bed, his hands clenching into tight fists at his sides. Lila. How did it come to this? Ethan inquired, his voice soft yet laden with feeling. What held you back from getting in touch? Why was I not informed? Her eyes gradually opened, the focus of her gaze still lingering in a haze. She averted her gaze, her eyes locked onto the window. She spoke softly, because I couldn't. Not for you. Not to me, he insisted, moving in closer. Lila, you're residing in your vehicle. You're expecting, for heaven's sake. Why didn't you speak up? Her hand gripped her stomach with a subtle tension, and she exhaled unsteadily. I assumed it wouldn't matter to you, Ethan. Her voice carried an elusive quality that he couldn't fully identify. Not after everything, her words struck him with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. Lila, his voice heavy with remorse. You're aware that isn't accurate. Am I? She inquired, glancing over her shoulder to meet his gaze. Her eyes held a weariness, and her expression was a mystery. Back then, you hardly acknowledged my presence, Ethan. What makes this situation unique? He parted his lips to protest, yet the words eluded him. She was right. The burden of his past mistake loomed over him, a relentless reminder of his shortcomings, more oppressive than it had ever been. Lila let out a soft sigh, her eyes wandering up to the ceiling. It was never meant to unfold this way, she murmured softly. Once I departed, I believed I could start anew. I believed I could create a fresh start for myself. What transpired? He inquired softly, inclining his body closer. After a prolonged silence, she finally found her voice once more. I entrusted my savings to my cousin Mia. She was meant to reimburse me, but then she lost her employment. Then my position was eliminated, and I struggled to manage the rent. I endeavored to find a solution, yet. She let her voice fade, shaking her head, as one thing followed another. Ultimately, I found myself unable to keep up with the costs of the apartment. I found myself in my car. A few weeks back, it stopped working. Ethan gazed at her, his heart constricting with each syllable she spoke. What was the reason you didn't reach out to me? He inquired once more, his tone softer this time. She stated plainly, her gaze locking onto his, because I didn't want to. I never intended for you to witness me in this state, Lila. However, she dismissed him with a shake of her head. I've been getting by, Ethan. I've managed, just barely, and I didn't require your intervention to sort things out, not after all that's happened. She was completely justified in feeling that way. He reclined in the chair, fingers combing through his hair as he attempted to absorb all that she had shared with him. After years of looking away, he finally noticed the fractures in the life he had constructed, the areas where he had stumbled, not only with her but within himself as well. I apologize for all that has transpired. She remained silent, her eyelids fluttering shut once more, surrendering to the weight of fatigue. Ethan remained still, observing her rhythmic breaths, and in that moment, he truly grasped the profound loss he had endured, the precious moments that had slipped away from him. For the first time, he understood the depth of his desire, his need to set things straight. Over the next few days, Ethan made regular visits to the hospital to see how Lily was doing. She appeared to be improving, her complexion brightening, and her movements becoming more agile. The atmosphere hung heavy around them, a silent strain that neither had summoned the courage to disrupt. A nurse walked in, her smile radiating warmth, as she assisted Lila in adjusting her gown for the ultrasound. Ethan perched in the chair next to Lila, his hands knotted in his lap, striving for an air of tranquility, even as his chest threatened to burst with tension. Lila reclined on the examination table, her shirt lifted slightly to expose her rounded belly. The nurse gently spread a cool gel across her stomach, while the room resonated with the soothing rhythm of the baby's heartbeat. Ethan's breath hitched at the sound. It was incredibly steady, undeniably real. He found himself unable to look away from the monitor, captivated by the delicate silhouette of the small life developing within her. It felt otherworldly, as if plucked straight from the realm of dreams. At a loss for words, he remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the screen. The physician entered, beaming with a clipboard in tow. "Ah, there's the little one," he remarked with a bright smile, glancing at the monitor, appearing healthy and perfectly on schedule. "Well done, Dad." Ethan blinked, his heart momentarily halting. "Excuse me." The remark escaped his lips with an unexpected edge, slicing through the gentle cadence of the atmosphere. He turned sharply to Lila, his eyes filled with surprise. What did he just utter? The physician, unaware of the abrupt strain in the air, let out a soft laugh. "I expressed my heartfelt congratulations. It seems you have a healthy little one on the way." Ethan glanced at Lila, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic dance. Her gaze was elsewhere. Her eyes were locked on the ceiling, her mouth set in a firm line. Her silence resonated profoundly, and in that instant, he understood. "Lila, tell me, is the baby mine?" Yet, she remained silent, her eyes betraying her with a fleeting, involuntary flicker that spoke volumes. Ethan sensed a profound change in the very foundation of his reality. The atmosphere in the room felt suffocating, each breath a struggle, his fingers clenching the armrests as he grappled with the weight of the revelation. "Why didn't you share that with me?" His voice was soft, teetering on the edge of restraint. He found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unsure whether the sting of hurt or the fire of anger consumed him more, perhaps it was a blend of both. "Why didn't you believe I deserved to be informed?" Lila tilted her head ever so slightly, her expression shrouded in caution. "As it turns out, it would have made no difference. Back then, you hardly even acknowledged my presence, Ethan. What makes this situation unique?" He recoiled at her words as if they had struck a nerve he was unaware existed. "That's unjust," he remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's clear that this situation lacks fairness, wouldn't you agree?" She retorted, her tone now more cutting. She propped herself up a bit, grimacing as she shifted her stance. "You simply weren't present, Ethan. Your absence during the times I needed you most is felt deeply, especially when we were meant to be creating a future side by side. You were perpetually occupied, consumed by your commitments, leaving little room for anything that didn't center on your professional life. And now, you believe you can simply waltz in and resolve it all. Her words struck him like a tempest, a whirlwind of feelings churning within his heart. He found himself at a loss for words, struggling to convey to her that he had changed, or at the very least, that he no longer wished to be that person. I allowed you to leave, believing it was what you required. I once believed I fell short for you, but clarity has come to me now. I was absent when you needed me the most. I sincerely apologize for that, Lila. I truly am. She gazed at him, her demeanor becoming a touch gentler, yet the strain in her shoulders remained unyielding. It's more complicated than that, Ethan. This goes beyond mere apologies, it's about taking responsibility and being present. You can't just come in at this moment and expect me to accept that you've transformed. He quickly stated, I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm seeking an opportunity to demonstrate my commitment, to show that I truly want to be present, for you and for the baby. Not from a sense of duty, not because it's required of me, but because it is my choice. Lila gazed at him intently, her weary eyes shimmering with unfallen tears, as if she were seeking a trace of assurance in his expression, a sign that his words held truth. Her voice quivered as she finally found the words, breaking under the burden of her openness. I can't do this alone, she whispered, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her confession. A heartfelt cry emerging from fatigue, dread, and the overwhelming solitude that had shadowed her during each bleak night spent in her vehicle. You won't need to, he replied without hesitation. I assure you, Lila, whatever you require, I will be by your side. I'm here to stay. She offered a subtle nod, barely noticeable, yet it conveyed everything needed. All right, her voice laced with fatigue. Okay, Ethan experienced an unusual blend of relief and resolve wash over him. It wasn't quite absolution, not at this moment, but it marked the beginning of something new. He sensed an opportunity to amend the past, not solely for Lila, but for the life they had built together. He was determined not to let that opportunity pass him by once more. The upcoming weeks unfolded in a flurry of transformations, the majority sparked by Ethan. He felt a sense of uncertainty about how to begin, yet he understood that he could no longer allow Lila to face her challenges alone. He had the means to help, and he was resolute in his commitment to become the man she and the baby required him to be. His foremost concern was ensuring her safety. He dedicated countless hours on the phone with real estate agents, adamantly urging them to locate an apartment in a serene neighborhood near the hospital. When he finally revealed the place to Lila, her response took him by surprise. It's overwhelming, Ethan, as I stand in the doorway of the sunlit living room. She cradled her hands gently over her belly. There's no need for all of this effort. Indeed, I do, as I move closer to her. Lila, you require a cozy place, a sanctuary of sorts. This isn't an attempt to resolve everything in an instant, it's simply my way of easing things a bit for you both. Her eyes held on to him for a fleeting moment, revealing the uncertainty that danced within them. At last, she gave a nod. All right, she replied, with a hint of hesitation. Thanks a lot. Yet Ethan's journey was far from over. He took care of her medical bills effortlessly, making sure she wouldn't have to stress about the growing expenses that had been looming over her. Though the grand gestures held significance, it was the subtle ones that started to create an impact. The situation was a complete catastrophe. He had followed an online tutorial, certain that he could manage something straightforward, like pasta. Yet, the sauce turned out charred, the noodles clumped together in a sticky disaster, and the whole kitchen reeked of smoke. Lila lingered in the doorway, a playful smile gracing her lips as she observed him desperately flailing a dish towel at the smoke detector. You know, she said, stifling a chuckle, there's this incredible creation known as takeout. It could be worth your consideration. Ethan glanced at her, his cheeks tinged with color, not solely due to the warmth of the stove, but also from the humiliation of his unsuccessful effort. He muttered, attempting to convey a sense of goodwill, even as the corners of his mouth betrayed him with a reluctant smile. She moved in, a slight shake of her head accompanying her approach. "Thank you for your effort," she remarked, gently taking the spoon from his hand. "Perhaps next time, you might want to consider sticking with salad." Their laughter rang out, shattering the heavy silence that had hung between them for what felt like an eternity. He took it upon himself to be by her side at every doctor's appointment, sitting next to her in the waiting room and engaging in the discussions during the checkups. Initially, Lila appeared taken aback by his curiosity, her eyebrows raising subtly when he inquired about due dates and feeding routines. Yet as time passed, her initial surprise transformed into a gentler emotion, perhaps gratitude or even a sense of trust. "You really don't need to attend all of these," she remarked one afternoon as they exited the clinic. She straightened her coat, casting him a look that blended intrigue with wariness. Many men would typically defer these matters to the mothers. "I'm not like other guys," he said with a straightforward tone, keeping the door open for her. "This isn't solely your journey, it's about us navigating this together." Her silence lingered, yet the subtle curve of her lips conveyed everything he needed to know. Their exchanges became more fluid, the pauses between them lighter. Ethan discovered a growing anticipation for their shared moments, relishing even the ordinary ones. He began to frequent her apartment more often, bringing along groceries, assisting her in organizing the baby's belongings, and simply being present. Gradually, the barriers Lila had constructed around her heart started to fade away. One evening, as they lounged on the couch after dinner, this time indulging in takeout, Ethan stole a glance at her, his heart weighed down by an unnameable feeling. As she folded the delicate onesies, her hands moved with a tenderness that conveyed the deep affection she already felt for the little one. "Lila," he murmured softly, his voice shattering the serene stillness. She glanced upward, her hand suspended in the act of folding. "Indeed," he paused, his fingers gliding over the contours of the coffee table. "I have something to share with you." With a slight furrow in her brow, she placed the onesie down gently. "All right," she remarked, her voice careful. "What is it exactly?" He inhaled deeply, his eyes locked onto the ground. "I believe that achieving success and creating a life for us would prove my worthiness to you. I believed it would improve things, yet it only served to distance you from me." Lila's expression became gentler, and she reclined a bit, her arms comfortably placed on her lap. "Ethan," she started, her voice quivering just a bit. "I never required you to be flawless. I never required the grand house or the prestigious position or any of that." She blinked, and he noticed her eyes shimmering with tears. "I just needed you to try," she said, her voice trembling. "That is everything I have ever desired." His chest constricted, the heaviness of her words enveloping him like a shroud. "I'm attempting now," he murmured, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "I understand it might be late, perhaps too late, but I'm present, and I'm staying put." She gazed at him for an extended moment, the quiet lingering in the air, and then, gradually, she gave a nod. "I understand," she replied gently. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it sufficed. After a long time, Ethan sensed that he had arrived at his destined place, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path ahead for them to explore together. The phone rang in the dead of night. Ethan had just slipped into slumber when his phone vibrated on the nightstand, the noise piercing and demanding in the stillness. Heavy-eyed, he extended his hand, narrowing his gaze at the display. Lila's name appeared, causing his heart to momentarily halt before it surged into a rapid rhythm. "Lila," he replied, his voice strained with concern. "It's time," she declared, her voice trembling and hurried. "I believe it's unfolding." "Ethan, I feel frightened." "Stay right there," he instructed, already out of bed and slipping on his shoes. "I'm en route. Simply take a moment to breathe, all right? I'll arrive in 10 minutes. The journey to her apartment stretched out, each second dragging on like an eternity. Each red light and every sluggish vehicle in front of him caused a tightening sensation in his chest, filled with irritation. As he approached her building, his hands quivered on the steering wheel. He discovered her on the couch, her complexion wan and shimmering with perspiration, one hand clutching her abdomen, the other grasping the armrest tightly. "Ethan," she breathed out sharply as he hurried toward her. "I believe it's a bit premature." "It's all right," he murmured, kneeling next to her and gently grasping her unoccupied hand. "We will persevere through this challenge. All right, it's time to take you to the hospital." He assisted her in standing, navigating the moment with both caution and urgency. With each step, she winced, her grip on his arm tightening as they approached the car. He gently placed her in the passenger seat, his hand resting on her shoulder for a brief moment. "We've got this," he declared, even as his heart raced within him. The hospital swirled with hurried actions and whispered conversations. Medical professionals led them through the corridors and into the delivery room, their directions steady yet pressing. Ethan remained close to Lila, gripping her hand tightly as she clenched her jaw in pain. With every contraction, her grip tightened around him, fierce and unyielding, and he found himself indifferent to the possibility of his fingers being crushed. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured, gently tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear, "just a bit longer." She cast him a fierce look between breaths. "Refrain from saying, 'just a little longer,' unless you are the one experiencing this." Ethan let out a soft laugh, even as his voice trembled with feeling. "That's a valid observation," he remarked, "yet you continue to be remarkable." Time stretched on, heavy with tension and fatigue, each minute blending into the next. Then, at last, a sound broke the silence, the first sharp, piercing cry of their daughter. Ethan's breath hitched as the nurse gently placed the small, squirming bundle into Lila's embrace. Lila's expression transformed immediately, her weariness dissipating as she looked down at the baby. Ethan gazed, his heart constricting as a surge of feeling enveloped him. He was unprepared for the rush of emotions that hit him simultaneously, joy, awe, an intense and profound love that constricted his throat and brought tears to his eyes. "She's flawless," Lila murmured, tears cascading down her face. As she softly caressed the baby's delicate hand, Ethan drew nearer, his own tears on the verge of spilling. "Indeed, she truly is." In that moment, all else vanished, the regrets, the mistakes, the years that had come between us. The only thing that truly mattered was the fragile life they had welcomed into existence and the silent vow to improve, to strive for greatness for her sake. The subsequent days unfolded in a chaotic blend of restless nights and challenging lessons. With unwavering resolve, he delved into every parenting book available, posed countless questions to the nurses, and immersed himself in a plethora of tutorials on newborn care. The initial attempt at swaddling the baby turned into a complete fiasco. The blanket became tangled in an awkward heap, and the baby squirmed out almost immediately. "How do they make this seem so effortless in the videos?" he murmured, his brow knitted in concentration as he attempted once more. Lila, perched close by with her cup of tea, erupted into laughter. "You're overanalyzing it," she remarked, placing her mug on the table. "Allow me to demonstrate." With gentle precision, she led his hands, demonstrating the perfect way to fold the blanket into place. As the baby was wrapped up snugly, a triumphant grin spread across Ethan's face. He glanced at Lila and remarked, "Look at that. Our collaboration is truly effective." "Don't get too full of yourself," she playfully remarked, yet her smile carried a warmth that had been absent for quite some time. They gradually discovered their flow while maneuvering through the tumult of new parenthood as a team. Countless nights passed in a haze of midnight feedings and diaper changes, mornings greeted with shared yawns and laughter over lukewarm coffee, and tranquil afternoons spent observing their daughter slumbering serenely in her bassinet. One evening, as Ethan gently lulled the baby back into slumber following a notably restless period, Lila emerged in the doorway. She rested against the frame, arms crossed, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "You have a real talent for this," she murmured softly. Ethan glanced upward, taken aback. "I'm trying," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid disturbing the sleeping baby. "At times, it seems like I'm just improvising my way through." "Welcome to parenthood," Lila remarked with a light chuckle as she entered the room. She positioned herself next to him, her eyes drifting toward the infant cradled in his embrace. "Honestly, Ethan, you're performing admirably." The genuine quality of her voice stirred something deep within him. He gazed at her, his demeanor gentle. "Thank you," he remarked. "That holds significant value." As time passed, the divisions between them gradually diminished. They began to stroll through the park with the baby nestled in her stroller, savoring serene moments as they observed her delight in the rustling trees and the dogs trotting by. They delved deeper into discussions about the baby, sharing their aspirations and even confronting the topics they had long sidestepped. One evening, as they nestled together on the couch, their daughter peacefully slumbering in her crib, Ethan turned to Lila. "You know," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "I never imagined I would have another opportunity, with you, with everything that surrounds us." Lila gazed at him, her face a mask of inscrutability for an instant. Then she offered a gentle smile. "You deserved it," she stated matter-of-factly. It wasn't quite absolution, but it marked a progression. As they lingered in that serene moment, a gentle warmth enveloping them, Ethan came to understand that this chaotic, flawed, yet exquisite existence was everything he had ever desired. This time, he was determined not to let it slip away.